The apartment, barely bigger than a shoebox, felt like a furnace. Each shallow breath Jordan took was a rasping plea for relief, his small body burning with a fever that seemed to consume him from the inside out. Mia pressed a damp cloth to his forehead, the meager coolness offering only fleeting comfort. Her own body ached with exhaustion, the weight of her responsibilities pressing down on her like a physical burden. 6 years old, and Jordan looked so frail, so vulnerable, his eyes wide with fear. Mia hadn't slept properly in days, the relentless demands of the diner leaving her drained and hollow. She worked double shifts, scrubbing greasy grills, balancing trays laden with steaming plates, and enduring the sometimes rude, often impatient customers. Every dollar counted, every tip was crucial to keeping a roof over their heads and food on the table. But lately, it felt like they were barely treading water, one paycheck away from complete disaster. Tonight was different, though. This wasn't just a sniffle or a cough. This was a raging fever that threatened to overwhelm her. The thermometer glared at her, the mercury rising to a terrifying 103 degrees. Jordan whimpered, clutching his stomach, his small body convulsing. She desperately needed medicine, but her wallet was heartbreakingly empty. A few crumpled bills, barely enough to cover a loaf of bread or a generic cough syrup, a temporary fix. But not a solution to this crisis. Her gaze drifted to the stack of bills on the kitchen counter, a looming monument to her financial struggles. The electricity bill was due tomorrow, and she was already behind on rent. If she didn't pay, they'd be plunged into darkness, adding another layer of fear to Jordan's illness. She remembered Mr. Henry, the elderly regular at the diner, with his kind smile and gentle eyes. He'd always been supportive, offering words of encouragement and a quiet presence that somehow eased the loneliness that often plagued her. He'd once mentioned his past as an accountant, now retired and living on a fixed income. "You got a sharp mind, Mia," he'd said, his voice laced with genuine admiration. "Why aren't you using it? You could be so much more than a waitress. You have the potential for so much more." His words echoed in her mind, a painful reminder of dreams deferred, of a life she longed for but could never seem to reach. She picked up the faded photograph of her father, his eyes twinkling with pride and unwavering belief in her. "Never give up, Mia," he'd always said, his voice a comforting whisper in her memory. She looked back at Jordan, coughing weakly, his face flushed with fever, and vowed to keep fighting. For him, for his future, for the memory of her father's faith. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, a silent promise to overcome any obstacle, to protect her son, to never surrender. The power company could wait, she decided, her voice firm, her resolve renewed. Her son's health, his well-being, came first. She needed to find a way. The rain hammered against the windows of the diner, a relentless percussion that seemed to amplify the turmoil in Mia's heart. The old building groaned and shuddered under the force of the storm, mirroring the fragility of her own existence. She barely noticed the bell above the door chime, announcing a late arrival. She braced herself for another demanding customer, another face etched with weariness and impatience. But when she looked up, she froze, her breath catching in her throat. Standing just inside the doorway, his silhouette framed by the storm, was Clint Eastwood. He looked older, more weathered than the movie images she carried in her mind, the lines etched on his face telling tales of battles fought and wisdom earned. But there was no mistaking that face. Those piercing blue eyes that seemed to see straight through her. Those iconic features that had captivated audiences for decades. A wave of memories washed over her, Saturday nights with her dad, huddled on the worn-out couch, watching old westerns, captivated by Eastwood's stoic heroes, drawn to his quiet strength and unwavering moral code. It felt surreal, like a piece of her past had materialized in the present, a ghost from her childhood stepping into her reality. She glanced down at her stained apron, suddenly self-conscious, feeling woefully inadequate in the presence of such a legend. He scanned the room, his gaze lingering briefly on Mia, a flicker of recognition in his eyes, before settling on a booth tucked away in the back corner. Shrouded in shadow, he seemed haunted, a shadow of weariness clinging to him like the rain on his coat. He moved with a quiet grace, a deliberate calm that belied the storm raging within him. He ordered a coffee, his voice low and gravelly, a familiar timbre that resonated deep within her. As she poured it, her hands trembling slightly, she couldn't help but wonder what a Hollywood icon was doing in a small diner like hers. Miles from the glitz and glamour of Los Angeles. Was he seeking solace from the pressures of fame? Was he searching for a connection to a simpler time? Was he hiding from something? She watched him take a sip. His eyes narrowed, as if he were searching for something more than just caffeine. Something deeper, something lost. A strange feeling settled over her. A sense of destiny. A premonition that this encounter was more than just a chance meeting. That this night was about to change her life in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. "Just a coffee and a burger," he'd said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Make it taste like it used to." The unusual request hung in the air, adding another layer of mystique to his already enigmatic presence. Mia tried to focus on the task at hand, grilling the patty, assembling the burger with practiced precision. But her mind was racing, replaying his words, searching for their hidden meaning. What did he mean by, "like it used to"? Was he talking about a specific burger? A memory tied to this place? Was he referring to a time long past? A bygone era of simpler pleasures? Or was it something more personal? A longing for a connection lost to time? The possibilities swirled in her head, each more perplexing than the last. As she carried the steaming plate to his booth, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a surge of adrenaline coursed through her veins. The diner was nearly empty now, the storm outside having driven away most of the late-night travelers. Only a few die-hard truckers remained, their faces illuminated by the flickering neon lights, and a young couple huddled in a corner booth, lost in their own world. She approached Eastwood's booth cautiously, feeling a strange mix of anticipation and trepidation. As she served the burger, the burly man from the corner booth stumbled to his feet, his face flushed and eyes bloodshot, the unmistakable signs of intoxication. He lurched towards Mia, his movements unsteady, his intentions clearly lecherous. "Hey, doll," he slurred, his voice thick with alcohol. "Why don't you sit down for a while? I'm feeling lonely." Before Mia could react, her stomach dropping with fear, Eastwood was on his feet, his movements surprisingly swift and agile for a man his age. He stepped between Mia and the drunkard, his presence radiating a quiet authority that demanded respect. "Leave her alone," he said, his voice low and dangerous, the same steely tone he'd used in countless westerns to confront villains and defend the innocent. The drunkard looked up, his eyes widening in recognition, his bravado instantly evaporating. He mumbled apologies, his face paling with shame, and quickly retreated back to his booth, shrinking under Eastwood's piercing gaze. Eastwood helped Mia regain her balance, his hand steady on her arm. "You okay?" he asked, his eyes searching hers, his concern genuine. "Yeah," she managed, her voice trembling, still shaken by the encounter. Thank you for everything." Clint Eastwood took a bite of the burger, chewing slowly, his eyes closed, savoring each flavor. A moment later, he opened his eyes, a faint smile playing on his lips. "This is remarkable," he said, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "It's like stepping back in time. It's exactly what I've been looking for. You got a real gift," he continued, his gaze fixed on Mia. "You've reminded me of someone I knew a long time ago. Someone who made a burger just like this. Someone very special." He paused, a shadow crossing his face, a hint of sadness in his eyes. "Here," he said, reaching for the check and scribbling something on the back. "Keep the change, and read this when you have a moment. It's got everything to do with your father. Tell him you were well." Mia felt a surge of confusion mixed with anticipation as she took the check. Her dad? What could Clint Eastwood possibly know about her dad? 1,000 questions raced through her mind, each more perplexing than the last. The diner was quiet when she finished her shift. The only sounds the gentle hum of the refrigeration units and the distant rumble of trucks on the highway. The cramped backroom, usually a refuge for tired employees, now felt charged with an almost palpable energy. With trembling hands, she unfolded the check, her eyes scanning the lines of writing, her heart pounding in her chest. Then, she saw the amount. $10. $10,000. She reread the number, unable to comprehend what she was seeing. It couldn't be real. It had to be a mistake. But there it was, in black and white, a sum of money that could change her life in an instant. Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring her vision. Relief washed over her, A wave of overwhelming gratitude that threatened to drown her. The rent, the medication for Jordan, the overdue car payment, everything seemed manageable. Everything seemed possible. The stack of bills on the counter wouldn't be threatening her anymore. A whirlwind of emotions surged through Mia. Relief warred with disbelief. Gratitude tangled with a gnawing sense of unworthiness. $10. It was more money than she'd ever seen in her life. While it could solve all her current problems, it brought a sense of responsibility she hadn't expected. Did she know anything about Clint Eastwood? Was she even worth that much money? Was she simply his act of charity for his conscience? She reread the message on the note. It's got everything to do with your father. Tell him you were well. What did that mean? Was this some elaborate act based on a past relationship between the two? More than anything, this was an issue she needed to get help with. Someone more grounded. She picked up the phone and dialed. Girl, you aren't going to believe this. Mia started when Tasha picked up the phone, trying to keep her voice steady, but failing miserably. Tasha listened intently on the other end, only interjecting with sounds of disbelief. As she was mid-sentence, the bell above the door jingled violently. Mia turned, her heart sinking as Mark stormed into the diner. I need to talk to Jordan. You can't keep him from me. Mia. Mark's voice was loud, aggressive, and filled with a thinly veiled threat. He was clearly agitated, his eyes bloodshot and wild. Mia's stomach churned with a mixture of fear and anger. She knew Mark was trouble. Always had been, but lately, he seemed to be spiraling out of control, his desperation growing more and more dangerous. As they argued, the phone slipped from Mia's grasp, clattering to the floor. Tasha's concerned voice echoed from the receiver as the line went dead. Mark advanced on Mia, his face contorted with rage. You think you're too good for me now? Huh? Got some fancy Hollywood sugar daddy paying your bills? As Mark stepped forward, Mia braced herself. She didn't want to start a scene, but she wouldn't let him intimidate her either. She had to protect herself. And more importantly, protect Jordan. The sudden intrusion of Tasha broke the tension. Having heard enough through the phone, she rushed to the diner, her face grim. Leave her alone, Mark, Tasha said, her voice firm and unwavering. She stepped between Mia and Mark, her small frame radiating unexpected strength. This doesn't concern you, Tasha, Mark snarled, his eyes narrowing. Stay out of it. But Tasha stood her ground, her gaze unwavering. It concerns me when you harass my friend, she retorted. Now get out of here before I call the cops. Mark hesitated, his gaze darting between Tasha and Mia, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He knew Tasha wasn't afraid to stand up to him. With a final sneer, he turned and stalked out of the diner, leaving Mia trembling in his wake. Tasha rushed to her side, her arms wrapping around her in a comforting embrace. Are you okay? She asked, her voice laced with concern. I'm okay, Mia whispered, her voice barely audible. But I'm scared, Tasha. He's getting worse. I don't know what he's capable of. Tasha guided Mia to a booth, her expression grim. We need to do something. Mia, she said, her voice serious. We can't let him keep terrorizing you like this. First thing is, get a restraining order. And second, is we need to figure out what this Eastwood situation is about. I don't like how many coincidences are starting to pile up. I agree, and now with this money it's more of a target on me. Maybe that money isn't a good thing for me, Mia said, a sense of defeat in her voice. The next morning, fortified by Tasha's unwavering support, Mia set out to seek legal advice. Tasha was right. She needed to put safeguards in place, both to protect herself from Mark and to ensure she used Eastwood's gift responsibly. The lawyer's office felt intimidating, a stark contrast to the warm, familiar atmosphere of the diner. Mr. Davies, a stern-faced man with a sharp gaze, listened intently as Mia recounted her story. His expression unchanging, he took notes diligently, occasionally asking clarifying questions, his demeanor professional and detached. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair, his eyes assessing her. This is a complex situation, Ms. Rodriguez, he said, his voice measured. We can certainly pursue a restraining order against Mr. Peterson. However, proving harassment can be challenging. We will need evidence, documented incidents, witness testimonies, anything to demonstrate a pattern of threatening behavior. He then turned to the matter of Eastwood's gift. As for the $10, I advise caution. While it appears to be a generous act, It's crucial to understand the legal implications. We need to determine the source of the funds and ensure there are no strings attached. A gift of that size could be subject to gift tax, and we need to be certain it won't create any future problems for you. He advised a formal letter be sent to Eastwood via his agent. Seeking clarification. As Mia sat at the bus stop, she began to cry. What had she done to deserve this, and why was it suddenly a big task to get this gift and to even follow her dreams? As tears streamed down her face, Mia sat down on the bus and remembered what her father always said. When the going gets tough, the tough get going. As Mia began attending her accounting classes, a subtle sense of unease settled over her. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that eyes were following her every move. At first, she dismissed it as paranoia, a side effect of the stress she'd been under lately. But the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each passing day. She noticed a woman in her accounting class looking at her up and down one day. Wow, it must be nice to get that much money for doing literally nothing. When you got enough to spread to everyone in this class, do you think you are better than everyone? The class went silent as Mia started to tear up. It was true. She was nothing like the students in this class and would always be poor compared to them. She was also starting to fall behind as well due to the new drama in her life. One evening, as she left class, a dark figure stepped out of the shadows and approached her. Her heart pounded in her chest, fear gripping her. She recognized him immediately. It was one of Mark's friends, a hulking man with a menacing glare. Mark wants his money. Bitch, he said. Eastwood gave it to both of you, right? So give it to him. It wouldn't be smart if you didn't. The man gets closer and grabs her. As the man grabbed Mia, a rush of pure adrenaline coursed through her veins. This wasn't just about the money anymore, it was about protecting herself. Protecting Jordan. Protecting her future. She would not let anyone steal her dreams. I don't have to do anything. You and Mark will never get a dime from me. Mia began to scream and yell and was saved by a professor who had heard everything. The student, scared, ran off, but Mia knew that there was going to be bigger problems in her life going forward. Her professor walked her home that night and assured her they would get this sorted and the student would be punished. That night Jordan asked his mother why she had been crying. As Mia began to tell her son, she began to cry again. She told him that she was going to do everything to protect him and make him safe. I'm going to fight for us, Jordan, I promise, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I won't let anyone take our dreams away. I will find a way to protect both of us. Despite the threats and the fear, Mia couldn't bring herself to abandon her efforts to help others. She'd started on this path because it felt right, because she wanted to make a difference, no matter how small, but the stress was taking its toll. She continued to surreptitiously deliver groceries to families in need, slipping envelopes of cash to struggling single mothers, and offering rides to those without transportation. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that her every move was being scrutinized. One day, while assisting an elderly neighbor with her groceries, Mark appeared, his face contorted with rage. You're giving away money that Jordan needs. What are you going to do when we're all homeless? The relentless stress, the constant fear, the overwhelming responsibility, it was all too much. Mia found herself struggling to concentrate in class, her grades slipping, her motivation dwindling. She was sleeping poorly, haunted by nightmares, and her appetite had vanished. One afternoon, she woke up with a fever, her body aching, her head pounding. She tried to get out of bed, but her legs. One afternoon, she woke up with a fever, her body aching, her head pounding. She tried to get out of bed, but her legs buckled beneath her, sending her crashing to the floor. Jordan, alarmed by the noise, rushed to her side, his face etched with worry. Mommy, what's wrong? He asked, his voice trembling. Mia tried to reassure him, but her voice was weak and raspy. I'm okay, honey, she whispered, just a little tired, but she knew it was more than just tiredness. She was on the verge of collapse, physically and emotionally drained. She tried to get up for another shift, but her body rejected and she could not even manage to get ready for the day. Despair washed over her, threatening to drown her completely. She was failing Jordan, failing herself, failing to live up to the promise she'd made. The weight of her failures felt crushing, suffocating. Was it all worth it? Was she strong enough to keep fighting? Or was she destined to remain trapped in this cycle of poverty and despair forever? She started to consider if her son would be better off in foster care since she could not even hold herself up. Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring her vision. She felt lost, alone, and utterly defeated. Then Mark started to knock on her door. He knew it was her day off and to torment her. He banged until he knew she had heard him. When Mark wouldn't leave her alone, Mia considered calling the police but decided not to. What was the point? They have never helped her before, so what would make this time different? But as she sat hopeless and wanting to hide, Tasha busted down her door. I thought something was up when you didn't answer. What is going on? She saw the state Mia was in. Fevered, tired, and completely at the end of her rope. I know that face and I am not going to let that happen. We are gonna work hard to make this better. For you and Jordan. She got Mia into bed and then opened the door. Where the whole diner crew was. The community has gathered to support her. They brought food, medicine, and money. Mrs. Davis, who had a family that had gone through this before, offered to take care of Jordan until Mia was better. It would be tough, but the world was ready to give Mia a break and get her some R&R. You have done so much for us and now it is our turn to do something for you. As Mia listened to them all speak, she realized she wasn't alone, that she had a community of support that would carry her through the darkest times. Even as she smiled, she remembered that Mark was out there, somewhere. That night, as Mia was dozing, Mark showed up at the doorstep. She wanted to ignore him, but he banged again and again, pleading for her to open the door. I can change, Mia, I swear, just give me another chance. Weeks passed, thanks to the unwavering support of her community and a newfound determination to succeed. Mia gradually began to recover. She was back in class, catching up on her assignments, and she even managed to secure a temporary restraining order against Mark. As she was working one day, Mia looked up and saw that Eastwood was back in the diner. For a moment, she was frozen. Why was he here? Was this some sort of joke? She went to approach him and tearfully began thanking him. As they discussed, Eastwood handed her an old photograph. In it were him, smiling at each other. Your father saved my life, you know. Served with him. I knew I needed to keep his legacy going. Life had finally settled down. Mark had moved away after being warned by the police that if he ever came back, he would be arrested. Mia had excelled in school and been offered a job right after graduation. As she was saying good night to Jordan, she thought about her father. His legacy was finally saved, and she knew he would be proud. One day Mia got a letter from overseas. Someone had given her a scholarship. The catch was that she needed to move over there for 3 months. This was her dream, but she would have to leave Jordan. Was she prepared to do that? She could see this leading to an amazing career. What do you think Mia will do? The first-class cabin of Flight 347 hummed with a tranquil air. A sanctuary of muted conversations and the clinking of crystal against crystal. Passengers, swathed in cashmere and confidence, were cocooned in their private bubbles. Some engrossed in business documents, others lost in the glow of their devices, and a few thumbing through glossy in-flight magazines. Outside, the sky was an unbroken canvas of deep azure, a breathtaking vista only visible to those willing to pay for the privilege. It was, by all accounts, a perfectly ordinary evening on a transatlantic flight, a testament to the seamless choreography of modern travel. Yet, hidden beneath the veneer of luxury, a subtle shift in energy was brewing, a quiet storm gathering momentum. It was the kind of tension you could almost taste, a premonition that something was about to disrupt the carefully orchestrated calm. For Amelia Reynolds, a young, ambitious flight attendant, this was just another routine flight, another opportunity to prove herself. She moved through the aisle with practiced grace, her smile polished, her eyes sharp, always scanning for the slightest imperfection, the tiniest deviation from protocol. She was a stickler for rules, a firm believer in order and efficiency, and she took pride in her ability to maintain the high standards expected of her in the first-class cabin. Perhaps a bit too ambitious, some of her colleagues whispered, but Amelia was determined to climb the ranks, to prove that she was more than just a pretty face in a uniform. When she spotted the elderly gentleman in seat 1A, a flicker of unease ran through her. He was dressed simply, a worn baseball cap pulled low over his brow, his hands resting calmly in his lap. He looked out of place, an anomaly in this sea of designer labels and perfectly coiffed hair. He didn't fit the profile of a first-class passenger. And Amelia's mind, ever vigilant, immediately flagged him as a potential problem. As she approached him, a strange feeling ran down her spine. This flight would not be as smooth as she had anticipated. Something was off, and she knew, with a growing certainty, that this encounter would be anything but routine. This was more than a simple passenger check. This was a collision course. The calm before the storm. Little did she know, the decision she was about to make would not only change her career forever, but become an event talked about across the entire world. Amelia's approach was measured, her smile unwavering. She stopped beside seat 1A, her gaze fixed on the elderly man. "Excuse me, sir," she began, her voice polite but firm. "May I see your boarding pass, please?" The man looked up slowly. His eyes, though aged, holding a sharp intelligence. He didn't seem startled or flustered, just patient, as if he had been expecting this. He reached into his pocket with a deliberate movement, retrieved his boarding pass, and held it out to Amelia. "Of course, young lady," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Here you are." Amelia took the pass, glanced at it quickly, and her initial unease deepened. The name on the pass read, C. Eastwood, and the seat assignment clearly indicated 1A. First class. But something still felt off. She didn't recognize the name, and the man's attire still clashed with the opulent surroundings. "Sir," she said, her voice laced with doubt, "there seems to be a mistake. This seat is reserved for a first-class passenger. Are you sure this is your ticket?" Eastwood's expression remained unchanged, a mask of quiet observation. "Quite sure," he replied, his eyes meeting hers with a steady gaze. "I believe you should check again." Amelia's doubts grew. "There is clearly an error. It seems like there's a discrepancy with the booking. You appear to be in the wrong seat," Amelia stated, her tone increasing in confidence and condescension. "There's nothing to check, sir. Respectfully, I must ask you to move to the economy section." Eastwood's lips barely moved, his eyes flashing with an indiscernible emotion. "I think it's you who needs to check. Perhaps you are judging a book by its cover?" The cabin air thickened with tension. All the sounds of luxury, the tinkling glasses, the turning of magazine pages, ceased. All eyes in first class were now fixed on the unfolding drama. A hushed, almost expectant silence settling in. Amelia, however, was too focused on her own sense of duty to notice the subtle shift in the cabin's atmosphere. "Sir, I must insist. I need to ask you to move to the economy section immediately." The scene had suddenly taken a turn into the absurd. One could hear a pin drop in the silence. It was in this moment that the stage was set, and the players were ready. But what was it that nobody could predict? The silence stretched, taut and expectant. Eastwood remained seated, his gaze unwavering, holding the ticket in his outstretched hand. The scene felt frozen. A tableau of power and defiance played out in the confined space of the first-class cabin. Then, a ripple of recognition spread through the cabin. A businessman in a tailored suit leaned towards his wife, whispering intently, "Do you see who that is?" "That's Clint Eastwood," his wife gasped, her eyes widening in disbelief. "No way, you're kidding me." The murmur spread like wildfire. Whispers carried on the air, fueled by disbelief and excitement. "Clint Eastwood? Here? No way. I think it is. Look at the eyes. The hat. It's definitely him. Oh my God, this is insane." The whispers reached Amelia, but she dismissed them as mere speculation. She was convinced she was in the right, that the elderly man was somehow trying to pull a fast one. She was too consumed by her own sense of righteousness to recognize the iconic face, the unmistakable presence of a Hollywood legend. Ignoring the growing buzz around her, she pressed on. "Sir, I'm afraid I must insist. Unless you can provide further proof of your first-class ticket, I'm going to have to ask you to move to the economy section." At that moment, a few passengers, sensing the escalating drama, discreetly pulled out their phones and began recording. They knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. A clash between a young, overzealous flight attendant and a Hollywood icon, playing out in real time. The tension was now palpable, a live wire humming with anticipation. What had started as a minor inconvenience was rapidly spiraling into a full-blown spectacle. A social media storm waiting to erupt. Seeing that the situation was rapidly escalating, and Amelia wasn't backing down, a more experienced flight attendant discreetly signaled to the flight supervisor. "Ms. Davies, a woman known for her calm demeanor and her ability to diffuse even the most volatile situations. Ms. Davies approached the scene with a measured gait, her expression neutral, her years of experience etched into the lines around her eyes. "Good evening, everyone," she said, her voice calm and authoritative. "I understand there's a slight issue here. Perhaps I can assist." Amelia, relieved at the arrival of backup, quickly explained the situation, emphasizing the passenger's lack of proper documentation and his refusal to move. "Ma'am," Amelia said, her voice tinged with frustration, "this gentleman claims to have a first-class ticket, but I suspect there's been a mistake. He's not dressed appropriately, and he's refusing to cooperate." Ms. Davies turned her attention to Eastwood, her gaze respectful. "Sir," she said gently, "would you mind showing me your ticket, please, just to ensure everything is in order?" Eastwood, with the same quiet patience, handed over his boarding pass. Ms. Davies examined it carefully, her eyes scanning the details. She then pulled out her tablet, accessed the passenger manifest, and compared the information. Her expression remained impassive, but a slight flicker of surprise crossed her face. "I see," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "According to our records, Mr. Eastwood is indeed assigned to seat 1A, first class." Amelia stared at her supervisor, her face flushed with disbelief. But that can't be right." Ms. Davies turned to Amelia, her eyes conveying a silent warning. "Amelia," she said, her voice low and firm, "Mr. Eastwood is in his correct seat. There seems to have been a misunderstanding." The tension in the cabin eased slightly, a collective sigh of relief rippling through the passengers. But Amelia, fueled by a mixture of embarrassment and stubbornness, refused to back down. She felt cornered, her authority challenged, and she was determined to regain control, even if it meant defying her supervisor. "But ma'am," she insisted, her voice rising in pitch, "I still believe there's something not right about this. He's causing a disturbance, and I don't feel comfortable with him in the first-class cabin." The word disturbance hung in the air, a loaded term that instantly escalated the situation. It was a term often associated with unruly passengers, security threats, and potential emergencies. For Amelia to use it in reference to Eastwood, a man who had been nothing but calm and composed, was a clear overstep, a blatant attempt to justify her own prejudice. A collective gasp went through the cabin. The passengers, who had initially been amused by the unfolding drama, now looked on with a mixture of disbelief and outrage. A woman in a navy blue pantsuit, sitting across the aisle, shook her head in disgust. "Unbelievable," she muttered. "This is getting out of hand." Another passenger, a middle-aged man with a receding hairline, leaned forward, his face flushed with anger. "Ma'am," he said, addressing Amelia, "you're the one causing a disturbance. He hasn't done anything wrong." Ms. Davies, sensing the rising tide of resentment, stepped in to try and regain control. "Amelia," she said, her voice sharp and urgent, "step over here for a moment. We need to discuss this privately." But Amelia, blinded by her own sense of righteousness, refused to listen. She was convinced that she was doing the right thing, that she was protecting the safety and security of the passengers. She straightened her shoulders, took a deep breath, and addressed the cabin. "I'm going to have to escalate this," she announced, tapping her earpiece. "I'm reporting a disruptive passenger." A collective groan echoed through the cabin. Passengers began shaking their heads in disbelief, muttering under their breath, "This is insane." One said, "She's completely lost it. She's going to regret this." Another added, Ms. Davies, realizing that the situation was spiraling out of control, could only watch in dismay as Amelia crossed the point of no return. What began as a simple misunderstanding had now transformed into a full-blown crisis. A social media nightmare waiting to explode. It was at that moment that the pilot, hearing of the escalating conflict, decided to intervene. As the wheels of Flight 347 touched down with a jarring thump, signaling the end of the transatlantic journey, the drama unfolding within its first-class cabin was far from over. The usual anticipatory bustle of passengers reaching for overhead compartments and gathering their belongings was replaced by an eerie silence. A collective holding of breath as everyone waited to see what would happen next. Reynolds, fueled by her convictions, watched the jet bridges getting connected from the window. With the passengers held hostage by her recklessness, she knew the only way to make it out now was to stick to her ground. Exiting the aircraft, Reynolds noticed the airport security at the gate. Looking around, their eyes intense, Reynolds was sure Eastwood would try to use his clout to make this incident worse for her. The passenger near Reynolds leaned into her. "It is all over the news now." A chill ran down Reynolds' back as she heard the news. She had thought the matter was contained and that Eastwood would never take things further. Eastwood knew what he was doing as they had reached the end of the flight. Reynolds felt that what has been done cannot be undone. It was the realization that made her feel the gravity of her actions. As they deplaned, Reynolds saw the flashing light of cameras. As they were making their way through the airport terminal, it felt as if the reporters and cameras were following them at every turn. Every angle, every expression, was captured and analyzed. Reynolds noticed that the cameras never followed Eastwood or the people in first class, instead they were fixated on her. As the crowd passed through the terminal, Reynolds noticed some of the camera people snickering as she walked by. She wondered if it was her actions that deserved this sort of treatment or if it was the fault of Eastwood and the other first-class passengers. Back in her small apartment, Amelia Reynolds was facing a storm. But this time, it wasn't of her own making. The glare of her laptop screen illuminated the chaotic mess of headlines and social media posts that had consumed her life. Flight attendant versus Eastwood. Who's in the right? Airline employee humiliates Hollywood icon. The comments were brutal, tearing her apart piece by piece, dissecting her motives and questioning her character. She's just jealous because she'll never be rich or famous. Hope she gets fired. She doesn't deserve that uniform. What a disgrace to the airline industry. The weight of the internet's judgment pressed down on her, suffocating her. Every notification, every tweet, every message was a fresh stab wound, a constant reminder of her monumental mistake. Amelia closed her laptop, but the darkness offered no escape. The images, the words, the voices still swirled in her head, a cacophony of condemnation. She tried to reason with herself, to justify her actions, but the logic felt hollow, drowned out by the deafening roar of public opinion. "I was just doing my job," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I was trying to protect the passengers." But the justification rang false even to her own ears. She knew she had let her own biases, her own prejudices, cloud her judgment. She had made a snap decision based on appearances. And now she was paying the price. Her phone buzzed incessantly, a relentless barrage of messages, both supportive and hateful. Her friends tried to offer words of encouragement, but their words felt hollow, their platitudes inadequate in the face of the overwhelming negativity. Her family called, their voices tight with concern, their words of support tinged with disappointment. She wanted to disappear, to crawl into a hole and never come out. She wanted to rewind time, to undo her mistake, to erase the past few hours from existence. But there was no going back. The damage was done. Her life, her career, her reputation, all lay in ruins. Victims of a single, fateful decision. The darkness of her apartment mirrored the darkness in her soul. She had lost everything, and she saw no way out. In the suffocating silence of her darkened apartment, Amelia found herself wrestling with a profound sense of isolation and regret. The flashing lights of the news vans outside her building served as a constant, unwelcome reminder of the public spectacle she had unwillingly become. The digital world had rendered her every misstep into a trending topic, a cautionary tale amplified a million times over. She wandered through her living space like a ghost, unable to focus on anything, haunted by the relentless replay of the events on the plane. The weight of her actions bore down on her with crushing force. "I was so arrogant," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible above the hum of the refrigerator. "I let my own prejudices blind me. How could I have been so wrong?" The faces of her colleagues, once a source of camaraderie, now flashed in her mind, their expressions tinged with disappointment and pity. She imagined the whispers, the hushed conversations, the sidelong glances. She had not only damaged her own reputation but had also brought shame to her profession. To the airline she represented, she curled up on her sofa, clutching a tattered blanket for comfort. But the chill of her remorse permeated every corner of her being. "What have I done?" she sobbed, tears streaming down her face. "I've ruined everything." But amidst the swirling vortex of self-pity and despair, a flicker of hope ignited. A memory surfaced, a moment of kindness she had shown to a distressed passenger on a previous flight. It was a reminder that she wasn't all bad, that there was still goodness within her. Perhaps, she thought, there was still a chance to salvage something, to learn from her mistakes, to somehow atone for her actions. As the first rays of dawn crept through her window, Amelia stirred. She knew the road ahead would be long and arduous, but she was determined to take the first step, to begin the difficult journey toward redemption. But, before she could formulate a plan, the news broke. Eastwood's words would spread more than the hate she got. The tweet came unexpectedly, a simple, understated message that rippled through the online world like a seismic wave. From the official account of Clint Eastwood, the 5 words that changed everything: "People make mistakes. Let her go." The words were devoid of malice, devoid of judgment, devoid of any trace of the anger or resentment one might expect from a man who had been subjected to such public humiliation. They were words of forgiveness, of compassion, of a quiet understanding of the human capacity for error. The impact was immediate and profound. The digital mob, which had been baying for Amelia's blood just moments before, suddenly paused, their collective outrage tempered by the unexpected act of grace. The tide of public opinion began to shift, subtly at first, then with increasing momentum. New headlines appeared, replacing the vitriol with more measured tones. Eastwood calls for forgiveness. Demands end to attacks on airline attendant. Clint Eastwood shows compassion. Says attendant should be allowed to move on. Internet reacts to Eastwood's plea. Forgiveness or justice? The comment sections, which had been a cesspool of negativity, now featured a mix of opinions, with many users expressing admiration for Eastwood's gesture and calling for a more nuanced understanding of the situation. Some die-hard critics remained, but their voices were gradually drowned out by the growing chorus of forgiveness. At the heart of the storm, Amelia Reynolds sat glued to her phone, her eyes wide with disbelief. She reread the tweet countless times, each reading bringing a fresh wave of emotion. He actually said that?" she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "He's asking people to forgive me?" The sheer magnanimity of Eastwood's act overwhelmed her. She had expected condemnation, scorn, perhaps even legal action, but forgiveness? That was something she never thought possible. A flicker of hope ignited within her, a spark of redemption in the darkness. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was still a chance for her to salvage her life, to rebuild her career, to prove that she was worthy of the forgiveness she had been granted. The call came unexpectedly, a lifeline thrown into the turbulent waters of Amelia's despair. It was a formal, almost impersonal voice on the other end, identifying herself as Emily Davenport from airline management. After a few perfunctory pleasantries, the woman cut to the chase. "Miss Reynolds," she said, her voice carefully measured, "we are calling to discuss your employment status with the airline." Amelia's heart sank. She braced herself for the inevitable, the confirmation of her worst fears. "I assume this is to inform me of my termination," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a pause on the other end, a beat of silence that felt like an eternity. Then, the woman spoke again, her tone shifting slightly, becoming a bit more conciliatory. "Not necessarily, Miss Reynolds," she said, "in light of recent developments and Mr. Eastwood's statement, we are re-evaluating our position. We believe that everyone deserves a second chance." Amelia's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Are you saying," she stammered, "are you saying you might not fire me?" "We are considering all options, Miss Reynolds," the woman replied. "We would like to invite you to a meeting to discuss your future with the airline." The offer hung in the air, a fragile olive branch extended across the chasm of public opinion and professional ruin. It was a chance, a glimmer of hope, but it was also a gamble. Amelia knew that accepting the meeting would mean facing the scrutiny of her superiors, the judgment of her peers, and the potential for further humiliation. But it was also a chance to plead her case, to explain her actions, to convince them that she was worthy of another opportunity. After a moment of hesitation, Amelia made her decision. "I'll take the meeting," she said, her voice firm and resolute. "I have something to say. Something I need to say." The days leading up to the meeting were a blur of anxiety and uncertainty. Amelia found herself caught in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, torn between hope and fear, optimism and dread. She spent hours rehearsing what she would say, crafting the perfect apology, trying to explain her actions without excusing them. She researched the airline's policies, reviewed her training manuals, and consulted with friends and former colleagues, seeking advice and support, but nothing seemed to ease her anxiety. She knew that her future rested on this meeting, that a single wrong word could seal her fate. The public's opinion, while shifting in her favor, remained divided. Some hailed her as a victim of circumstance, a scapegoat for a larger societal problem. Others condemned her as a bigot, a symbol of prejudice and intolerance. She tried to ignore the noise, to focus on the task at hand, but the weight of public scrutiny was suffocating. As the day of the meeting approached, Amelia found herself drawn to the one person who had the power to change her life, Clint Eastwood. She knew it was a long shot, a desperate attempt to seek guidance from the man she had wronged. But she felt compelled to reach out, to apologize in person, and to ask for his advice. She tracked down his contact information through a mutual acquaintance and sent him a heartfelt email, pouring out her remorse and explaining her situation. She didn't expect a response. She knew he was a busy man, a Hollywood legend with more important things to worry about than the plight of a disgraced flight attendant. But to her surprise, she received a reply within hours. It was a short, simple message, but it filled her with hope. "Come see me." It read, "We need to talk." The drive to Eastwood's ranch was long and contemplative, a journey away from the clamor of the city and into the heart of the California countryside. As Amelia neared her destination, she was struck by the tranquility of the landscape. The rolling hills, the sprawling fields, the sense of peace that permeated the air. The ranch itself was unassuming, a collection of rustic buildings that blended seamlessly with the natural environment. It was a far cry from the glitz and glamour of Hollywood, a testament to Eastwood's grounded personality. When Amelia arrived, she was greeted by a ranch hand who led her to a secluded patio overlooking a breathtaking vista. Eastwood was waiting for her, sitting in a rocking chair, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He stood as she approached, his eyes, though aged, still possessing that piercing intensity that had captivated audiences for decades. "Miss Reynolds," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Thank you for coming." Amelia stammered out an apology, her words tumbling over each other in a rush of emotion. "Mr. Eastwood, I am so sorry for what happened on the plane. I was wrong, I was arrogant, and I let my prejudices get the better of me. I ruined my career, and I brought shame to your name. I don't know what to do." Eastwood listened patiently, his expression impassive. When she finished, he sat in silence for a moment, his eyes still fixed on the horizon. Then, he turned to her, his gaze unwavering. "You made a mistake," he said. "We all make mistakes. The important thing is that you learn from it. Don't let it define you." Amelia's eyes welled up with tears. "But what can I do?" she asked. "My career is over. My reputation is ruined. Everyone hates me." Eastwood smiled, a hint of warmth crinkling the corners of his eyes. "That's not true," he said. "There are people who hate you. But there are also people who believe in you. People who are willing to give you a second chance. The airline is offering you that chance. Take it. Prove them wrong. Prove to yourself that you are better than this." He paused, his gaze becoming more intense. "But don't do it for them," he added. "Do it for yourself. Do it because you want to be a better person. Do it because you want to make a difference in the world." He stood up, walked to the edge of the patio, and gestured towards the vast landscape. "The world is full of opportunities. Miss Reynolds," he said, "don't let this one mistake hold you back. Learn from it, grow from it, and move on. And remember," he added, turning back to face her, "the greatest revenge is success." With those words, Eastwood offered Amelia not just forgiveness, but a path forward. It was a call to action, a challenge to rise above her circumstances and create a new chapter in her life. The choice was hers, and hers alone. Standing before the polished mahogany table in the sterile boardroom, Amelia Reynolds felt a tremor of apprehension course through her. The faces of the airline executives were impassive, their gazes scrutinizing, their thoughts unreadable. The weight of expectation, the pressure of public scrutiny, pressed down on her, threatening to suffocate her. She had rehearsed her opening statement countless times. But now, under the intense gaze of her superiors, the words seemed to evaporate from her mind. She took a deep breath, steadied herself, and began. "Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak," she said, her voice clear and resolute. "I know that what I did was wrong. I acted impulsively. I let my biases cloud my judgment. And I brought shame to this airline. I take full responsibility for my actions. And I am deeply sorry for the harm I caused. She paused, her eyes meeting the gaze of each executive in turn. I know that I have a lot to prove. She continued, I know that I need to earn back your trust. And the trust of the public. But I am committed to doing whatever it takes to make amends. I am committed to learning from my mistakes, to growing as a person, and to becoming a better employee. She spoke from the heart, her words raw and honest, her remorse palpable. She didn't offer excuses. She didn't deflect blame. She simply took ownership of her actions and expressed her sincere desire to make things right. When she finished, a silence descended upon the room. The executives exchanged glances, their expressions still unreadable. Finally, the CEO, a stern-faced man with a reputation for being ruthless, spoke. Miss Reynolds, he said, his voice low and measured. Your actions have caused significant damage to this airline's reputation. We have received countless complaints. And we have lost significant revenue. Some members of our board believe that you should be terminated immediately. Amelia's heart sank. She had known this was a possibility. But hearing the words spoken aloud was like a punch to the gut. Just as she was ready to accept defeat, the CEO continued. However, he said, we have also received a significant amount of support for you. Many people believe that you deserve a second chance. And Mr. Eastwood himself has spoken out in your favor. Therefore, we have decided to offer you that second chance. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. But, the CEO added, his voice hardening, this comes with conditions. You will be subject to a rigorous retraining program. You will be closely monitored by your supervisors. And you will be expected to adhere to the highest standards of professionalism at all times. One more mistake, Miss Reynolds, and you will be terminated immediately. Do you understand? Yes, sir, Amelia replied, her voice trembling with gratitude. I understand. Thank you for this opportunity. I won't let you down. Stepping back onto the tarmac, clad once more in the crisp blue uniform of a flight attendant, Amelia Reynolds felt a mixture of trepidation and resolve. It was a surreal moment. A second chance she had scarcely dared to hope for. The eyes of her colleagues, some curious, some cautious, some openly hostile, followed her as she made her way towards the boarding gate. She knew that the road ahead would be challenging, that she would have to earn back the trust of her peers, of her passengers, and of the world, but she was determined to prove that she was worthy of this second chance. Her first task was to apologize, to reach out to those she had wronged, to offer her sincere regrets for her actions. She started with the passengers on Flight 347, tracking them down through the airline's database and sending each of them a personalized letter, expressing her remorse and offering a sincere apology. Some responded with forgiveness, others with indifference, and a few with outright hostility. But Amelia persisted, determined to make amends. She volunteered for extra shifts, took on the most challenging assignments, and went above and beyond to assist her passengers, offering extra blankets, calming nervous flyers, and providing exceptional service with a genuine smile. She also reached out to community organizations, offering her time and resources to support causes she believed in. She volunteered at a homeless shelter, mentored at-risk youth, and participated in environmental cleanup projects. She wanted to show the world that she was more than just a disgraced flight attendant. That she was a caring, compassionate person who was committed to making a positive impact on the world. Slowly, gradually, the tide began to turn. Passengers began to recognize her, not with scorn, but with a hint of respect. Colleagues began to warm to her, offering words of encouragement and support. And the media, always hungry for a good story, began to chronicle her journey of redemption, highlighting her acts of kindness and her commitment to making amends. The road to redemption was long and arduous, but Amelia Reynolds was making progress. She was building bridges, mending fences, and proving to the world that even the most egregious mistakes can be forgiven, and that even the most tarnished reputations can be restored. Years had passed since the fateful flight that had changed Amelia Reynolds' life forever. The scars of that experience still lingered, but they had faded with time, replaced by a newfound sense of wisdom, compassion, and gratitude. She was no longer the ambitious, rule-bound flight attendant she had once been. She had learned the importance of empathy, the power of forgiveness, and the true meaning of humility. She had become a better person, not in spite of her mistakes, but But because of them, she now approached her job with a different perspective, seeing each passenger not as a potential problem, but as an individual with their own unique story, their own fears, and their own needs. She went out of her way to connect with her passengers, to listen to their concerns, and to offer them comfort and support. She had become a beacon of warmth and kindness, a symbol of second chances, a testament to the human capacity for redemption. One day, while working on a transatlantic flight, Amelia recognized a familiar face among the first-class passengers. It was the woman in the navy blue pantsuit, the one who had spoken out in her defense on Flight 347. Amelia approached her with a warm smile. "Excuse me," she said, "I don't know if you remember me, but I'm Amelia Reynolds. I was the flight attendant on that flight a few years ago." The woman looked at her for a moment, her eyes widening with recognition. "Of course, I remember you," she said. "You've come a long way." Amelia smiled. "Thank you," she said. "I just wanted to thank you for speaking out for me that day. It meant a lot to me." The woman smiled back. "You deserved it," she said. "You made a mistake, but you've more than made up for it. I admire your courage, your resilience, and your commitment to making a difference." As Amelia walked away, she felt a sense of closure, a sense of peace that she had never felt before. She had come full circle. From disgrace to redemption, from shame to pride, she had proven to herself, and to the world, that she was capable of change, capable of growth, and capable of greatness. And as the plane soared through the azure skies, carrying its precious cargo of passengers towards a brighter future, Amelia Reynolds knew that she was finally flying on a new flight plan. A flight plan guided by compassion, empathy, and a deep understanding of the human heart. And so, though her past would forever be a part of her, she looked forward to a horizon bright with promise, secure in the knowledge that she had learned from her mistakes and was ready to greet each new day with a spirit of humility, kindness, and unwavering hope. The boardroom was a fortress of glass and steel, mirroring Barron's own tightly controlled exterior. He sat at the head of the table, the very picture of a successful entrepreneur. Investors, eager to partake in his latest venture, a revolutionary AI startup, hung on his every word. But Barron's mind was elsewhere, a flicker of unease tugging at his composure. He glanced at his phone, trying to ignore the incessant vibrations. It was a critical moment, the culmination of years of hard work. Yet, the persistent buzz felt like a warning. Finally, he succumbed. The message flashed across the screen. "She's in danger. You can't abandon her." The words, stark and anonymous, hit him with unexpected force. He hadn't thought of her in years. Not consciously. Mrs. Henderson. The name echoed in the corridors of his memory, a mix of gratitude and unresolved guilt. She had been his mentor, his guide, the only person who had ever truly believed in him. He owed her everything, and he knew it. The room swam back into focus, the murmur of investment possibilities fading. He was torn. The deal was on the brink of sealing, potentially setting him up for life. But the message, it was a call to duty, a debt to repay. The decision slammed into him with the force of a tidal wave. He had to go. "Gentlemen," he announced, his voice firm despite the turmoil within. "I must excuse myself. An urgent matter has arisen." He didn't elaborate, didn't need to. His reputation for decisiveness and unwavering focus was enough to quell any immediate questioning. He stood, pushing his chair back with a screech that momentarily shattered the polished veneer of the room. He moved swiftly, heading for the elevator. Outside, the city throbbed with life, oblivious to the drama unfolding within him. He hailed a cab and gave the driver an address in the grittier part of town, an area he hadn't visited in years. As the cab sped through the streets, Barron's mind raced. What had happened to Mrs. Henderson? Why was she in danger? The questions tumbled over each other, fueled by a growing sense of dread. The cab lurched to a halt in a narrow, dimly lit alleyway. It was a world away from the pristine boardroom. A group of figures huddled in the shadows, their voices low and menacing. As Barron approached, he saw her. Mrs. Henderson, frail and vulnerable, was being cornered by a group of thugs. Her eyes, once bright with wisdom, were now clouded with fear. He had arrived just in time. Without a second thought, Barron plunged into the fray, adrenaline surging through him. Barron moved with a speed and ferocity that surprised even himself. Years of corporate battles had honed his instincts, and he knew how to use his size to his advantage. The thugs, caught off guard by his sudden intervention, scattered like rats. He stood protectively in front of Mrs. Henderson, his body shielding her from further harm. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice rough with concern. She looked up at him, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Baron, is that really you?" Her voice was a mere whisper, tinged with a mixture of relief and shock. He helped her to her feet. She was thin, almost gaunt, and her clothes were worn and ill-fitting. The years had not been kind. He had always known her as a force of nature, someone who could weather any storm. But now, she looked broken, defeated. "What happened?" he asked, his voice filled with compassion. She shook her head, her eyes darting around as if she expected the thugs to return at any moment. "It's a long story," she said, her voice trembling, "one I'm not sure I'm ready to tell." He knew better than to push her. Instead, he led her out of the alley and into his waiting cab. He took her to a small, discreet hotel he knew, far from the glittering towers of the city center. He booked a room for her, making sure it was clean and comfortable. He knew it wasn't much, but it was a start. In the hotel room, Mrs. Henderson finally began to relax, but a cloud of sadness still lingered in her eyes. She had nowhere to go, nothing to her name, and was being hunted. He offered her food, but she only picked at it, her appetite gone. He sat with her, listening as she began to slowly unravel the story of her downfall. Her family had turned on her, embezzling her fortune and leaving her destitute. She had spent the last few years drifting, trying to survive on the streets. "Why didn't you come to me?" Baron asked, his voice filled with pain. She looked away, her eyes glistening with tears. "I didn't want to burden you," she said softly. "You had your own life to live." He understood, but it didn't make it any easier to hear. He vowed to help her, to make things right, but as he left the hotel that night, a sense of foreboding settled over him. He knew that getting involved in Mrs. Henderson's life would have consequences. And he had a strong feeling that those consequences would be far-reaching and severe. That night as he lay in bed, he got a notification that she was trying to sneak out, and his adrenaline rose again. He had to stop her. He found her attempting to open a window to escape the hotel room. Seeing him, she collapsed. She was tired of running. "You can't keep running," Baron said, his voice a blend of concern and frustration. "They'll just keep finding you." Mrs. Henderson slumped against the wall, her body trembling. "What else can I do?" she asked, her voice filled with despair. "They've taken everything from me. Everything." He knelt down beside her, taking her hand in his. "I'm not going to let them," he said, his voice firm. "I'm going to help you get your life back." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "But, why? You have your own life, your own career. Why would you risk everything for me?" He looked at her, his heart aching. "Because you helped me when I had nothing," he said softly. "You believed in me when no one else did. I owe you everything, and I don't abandon the people I care about." He spent the next few days trying to help her, getting her new clothes and a new phone. But he still hadn't dealt with her money issues. She looked more comfortable, but also more wary, like she knew the storm was coming. Baron's friends and investors were less than thrilled with his decision to help Mrs. Henderson. They saw her as a liability, a distraction from his business goals. One powerful investor, a man named Wilkes, even confronted him directly. "You're throwing your life away for some homeless old woman," Wilkes said, his voice laced with contempt. "You could lose everything, your company, your reputation, everything you've worked for." Baron met his gaze, unflinching. "She's not just some homeless old woman," he said, his voice cold. "She's a human being, and she needs my help. And I will help her, even if it means losing everything." Wilkes scoffed. "You're a fool, Baron," he said, shaking his head. "You'll regret this." Baron ignored him, turning his back and walking away. He knew that Wilkes was right. Helping Mrs. Henderson would come at a cost, but he was willing to pay it. He couldn't turn his back on her, not after everything she had done for him. But in the back of his mind, he knew that there was more to this story than Mrs. Henderson was letting on. What could have possibly driven her family, the people she loved, to betray her so completely? He would have to find out. The internal conflict gnawed at Baron. He was a businessman, driven by logic and numbers. Helping Mrs. Henderson was an act of pure emotion, a defiance of all the principles he had lived by. He found himself increasingly distracted, unable to focus on his work. He agreed to an interview, trying to regain his public image from the accusations. A tabloid reporter, known for his ruthlessness, asked him about Mrs. Henderson. He spun the story to his advantage, hoping the public would be swayed by his words. Instead, the truth about Mrs. Henderson's life was revealed to the public. It had the opposite effect. The public called her an unreliable woman, and turned the interviewer against Barron. As the media scrutiny intensified, Barron's investors grew increasingly nervous. They saw him as a liability, a distraction from his business goals. One by one, they began to withdraw their support. Barron stood by her, defending her against the attacks. But his efforts were in vain. The damage was done. His reputation was tarnished. His company was teetering on the brink. And he was rapidly losing everything he had worked for. Barron started digging. He had to know what was going on. With each layer of information that he uncovered, he felt as though the world was against Mrs. Henderson. During his research, he hired a private investigator, who found the most heinous crime. Mrs. Henderson had a child, a son, but he was missing. There was not a single trace. Barron decided to confront Mrs. Henderson with his finding and was met with a fit of tears. He pressed her for information, but she was reluctant to give anything. She kept mumbling about how it was her fault, that she had failed as a parent. It was that moment when she felt like she had lost it all. He also uncovered another secret. Her daughter, the woman who betrayed her and left her for dead. But why? He decided to pay the daughter a visit. This is the start of the story. Let me know if you'd like me to continue, or if you have any specific elements you'd like me to include. The daughter's house was a stark contrast to Mrs. Henderson's current state. Opulent, modern, and cold, it screamed of money and success. Barron rang the doorbell, and the door was opened by a woman who could have been a younger, hardened version of Mrs. Henderson. Her name was Eleanor. "What do you want?" Eleanor asked, her voice sharp and unwelcoming. "I'm here about your mother," Barron said, his voice calm but firm. Eleanor's face hardened. "I have nothing to say about her." She started to close the door, but Barron stopped her. "I know what you did," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. "I know you were involved in her downfall." Eleanor's facade cracked for a moment, a flicker of fear crossing her face. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice trembling. "Don't lie to me," Barron said, his voice low and dangerous. "I know you and your family embezzled her fortune. I know you left her to fend for herself." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "So what?" She was old news. She was holding us back. We deserved that money. Barron fought to control his anger. "She's your mother," he said, his voice incredulous. "How could you do that to her?" Eleanor shrugged. "Family is overrated. Money is what matters." Barron turned to leave, disgusted. Before he reached the gates, Eleanor called out to him. She had a proposition. If he agreed to sell his company over to them, she would tell him about the location of her brother. In exchange, he would forget about what happened to their mother. He refused, and left, making Eleanor even more infuriated. Meanwhile, Mr. Wilkes approached Barron with an offer of his own. If Barron was to sign a contract with him and cut contact with Mrs. Henderson, he would allow his investors to return. If not, he would be ruined. He declined the offer, resulting in him losing $1 million contract. Barron's refusal to cave to Wilkes and Eleanor only intensified the pressure on him. The media, fueled by Wilkes's influence, launched a full-scale assault on his character, painting him as a naive fool, a bleeding heart who was throwing away his future for a lost cause. Just when he thought things couldn't get any worse, a new player entered the game, a dogged investigative reporter named Kenner. He had made a name for himself by exposing corruption and scandal, and he saw Mrs. Henderson as his next target. Kenner approached Barron with a proposition. Help him uncover the truth about Mrs. Henderson, and he'd give Barron a chance to defend her. But Barron sensed a trap. He knew Kenner was only interested in sensationalism, and he was afraid of what the reporter might unearth. Kenner found something regardless. He discovered a dark secret. Mrs. Henderson had been suspected of stealing money from a charity organization years ago. The allegations had never been proven, but the stain remained. Kenner threatened to expose this information, painting Mrs. Henderson as a fraud and a thief. Barron was faced with a terrible choice: help Kenner uncover the truth, risking further damage to Mrs. Henderson's reputation, or remain silent and let her face the accusations alone. He knew he had to protect her. But he also knew that the truth, whatever it might be, had a way of coming out eventually. The charity scandal erupted in the media, turning public opinion even further against Mrs. Henderson. She was summoned to court to answer questions about the allegations. Barron desperately tried to find evidence to clear her name, but everything seemed to be working against them. The documents were gone, witnesses were unavailable, and the trail had gone cold. The pressure was too much for Mrs. Henderson. She was already emotionally and physically fragile, and the weight of the accusations threatened to break her. She told Barron to give up, that she was tired of fighting. She wanted to go home. It seemed she was ready to give up on life. Barron refused to let her. He reminded her of the lessons she had taught him as a child. The lessons about perseverance, integrity, and the importance of standing up for what is right. He quoted all her favorite lines, reminding her of the words he had been taught to live by. He told her that he believed in her, and he begged her to believe in herself. "You taught me never to give up," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "And I'm not giving up on you." His words seemed to reach her, and she agreed to keep fighting. But Barron knew that time was running out. He had to find something, anything, to clear her name before it was too late. As Barron continued his investigation, he stumbled upon a shocking revelation. Eleanor, Mrs. Henderson's daughter, was the one who had orchestrated the entire campaign against her. She had planted the seeds of doubt about the charity, leaked the information to Kenner, and manipulated the media to turn public opinion against her mother. She was the reason for her downfall. He went back to her house, the cold and pristine place, and confronted Eleanor. The fight began. She tried to justify her actions, claiming that her mother had always favored her brother, always seen her as second best. She resented Mrs. Henderson, and she wanted to make her pay. "I did what I had to do," Eleanor said, her voice cold and unapologetic. "She deserved it." Mrs. Henderson, who had accompanied Barron, finally spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it was filled with pain. "How could you do this to me?" she asked, her eyes filled with tears. "I'm your mother." Eleanor shrugged. "You were never really a mother to me," she said. "You only cared about yourself and brother's name." The confrontation escalated, with harsh words, accusations, and recriminations flying between mother and daughter. But even as she stood there, Mrs. Henderson still pleaded for her daughter to take back her actions. Eleanor refused. "I'll stop here for now. Let me know if you want me to continue. We're getting closer to the climax and resolution." The pieces finally fell into place. Barron raced against time, gathering the final pieces of evidence that would exonerate Mrs. Henderson. He found a former employee of the charity who had witnessed Eleanor planting false documents and spreading rumors. He convinced the employee to testify in court, risking their own safety to tell the truth. The courtroom was packed, the atmosphere thick with tension. The employee took the stand, revealing Eleanor's treachery. The truth came pouring out, exposing Eleanor's lies and clearing Mrs. Henderson's name. The judge dismissed the charges, declaring Mrs. Henderson innocent. But the victory felt hollow. Mrs. Henderson was vindicated, but she was also broken. The betrayal by her own daughter had shattered her heart, leaving her feeling lost and alone. She had lost her family, her fortune, and her reputation. Even though she'd cleared her name, the scars remained. One night, Mrs. Henderson disappeared from the hotel. Barron searched frantically, his heart pounding with fear. He found a note she had left behind, a farewell letter filled with despair. She had lost everything, and she couldn't go on. She said that the world was cruel, and that the pain was too much for her to bear. A frantic race against time began. As Barron tried to retrace her steps, he drove around the city, searching for her, calling her name into the darkness. Hours passed, and his hope began to dwindle. He found her. She was wandering in the rain, on the brink of despair. He rushed to her side, his voice filled with desperation. He urged her not to give up, to not let Eleanor win. He reminded her of all the people who loved her, of the impact she had had on his life. He shared stories of his success. He told her that she was the reason for who he was. They talked for hours, a deep, soul-bearing conversation about forgiveness, loss, and hope. He convinced her that life was still worth living, that she still had something to offer the world. She agreed to continue living, to fight for a new beginning. After that night, she started to get sick, due to the rain, and her frail body was not strong enough to make it through. One morning, Barron found Mrs. Henderson peacefully asleep in her bed. She had passed away in her sleep, her face serene and calm. In her hands, she held a note, a final message to Barron. She thanked him for giving her a second chance at life, for showing her kindness and compassion when she needed it most. She told him that he had been the son she never had, and that she was proud of the man he had become. She encouraged him to continue living a life of purpose and to never lose sight of his values. Barron grieved deeply, but he also knew that Mrs. Henderson had found peace. She had faced unimaginable hardship, but she had never lost her spirit, her kindness, or her hope. She had left a lasting legacy, a testament to the power of love and compassion. Inspired by Mrs. Henderson's life, Barron decided to dedicate himself to helping others. He established a foundation in her name, providing assistance to the homeless and vulnerable. He used his wealth and influence to advocate for social justice, fighting for a world where everyone had a chance to thrive. He resigned from his company, selling his assets and donating it all to the foundation, deciding that what he had was enough. He knew that he could not make up for the suffering that Mrs. Henderson had endured, but he could honor her memory by making a difference in the lives of others. Years passed. Barron stood before a portrait of Mrs. Henderson, a gentle smile on his face. He read the lessons she had taught him, the words that had shaped his life. A saying that she told him echoed in his mind: sometimes, the smallest things can change a person's whole life. Barron walked out onto the street, a man transformed. He carried Mrs. Henderson's legacy with him, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope, always love, and always the possibility of redemption. Sierra Grill was a haven of controlled chaos. The air was thick with the smell of sizzling burgers, the clatter of silverware, and the constant hum of conversations. Megan navigated the crowded floor, her feet aching, her smile strained. She was stuck in a cycle of demanding customers, measly tips, and the lingering feeling that this wasn't where she was meant to be. Above the cashier's station, a faded photograph hung, a relic from a bygone era. It depicted a young man with a mischievous grin, his eyes full of life. Megan had passed it countless times, her mind too preoccupied with bills and rent to give it a second glance. It was just another piece of forgotten decor in a restaurant that felt increasingly like a prison. "Where's my damn steak?" A gruff voice interrupted her thoughts. A man with a red face and a gold watch was glaring at her from a booth. "I ordered medium rare, and this is practically raw." Megan took a deep breath, forcing a polite smile. "I'm so sorry, sir. I'll get the manager right away." This was just the start of another long night, she thought, as she trudged toward the back. Each day blurred into the next, with no sign of anything ever changing. It seemed she had no real direction, no plan, just a longing for something more. As she headed back to the table with Carol, the restaurant's manager, a sleek, black sedan pulled up in front of Sierra Grill. Megan glanced at it, intrigued but quickly dismissing the encounter. Little did she know, that car, and the man inside, would drastically alter the course of her life. The man who emerged from the sedan was unassuming. He wore a simple, worn leather jacket and jeans that looked as comfortable as an old friend. There was something about him, though, something that drew the eye, a quiet confidence, a presence that commanded attention without demanding it. He had deep-set eyes, the color of weathered stone, that seemed to hold a lifetime of stories. It was Clint Eastwood. Megan, still reeling from the difficult customer, approached him with a weariness she couldn't hide. In her mind, he was just another out-of-towner looking for a quick bite. She unconsciously judged him as she did many others, a fleeting face in her otherwise static life. "Table for one?" she asked, her voice flat. He nodded, his gaze sweeping across the bustling restaurant. "Yes, please." His voice was a low rumble, warm and comforting despite her terse demeanor. "Right this way," Megan muttered, grabbing a menu and leading him to a booth in a quieter corner. As she placed the menu in front of him, he looked up, his eyes locking onto hers. "So, what are your dreams, young lady?" he asked, a slight smile playing on his lips. Megan blinked, thrown off by the unexpected question. "Dreams?" she scoffed, a bitter edge creeping into her voice. "I'm just trying to survive, pal. Dreams are for people who can afford them." She turned and stalked away, leaving Clint to ponder her caustic response. He had a strange feeling about the waitress. The way she carried herself. He would have to get to know her better. Megan returned with Clint's burger, slamming it down on the table with more force than necessary. "Here's your food," she mumbled, avoiding eye contact. "Enjoy. Easy there," Clint Eastwood said gently. "No need to take it out on the burger." Megan just rolled her eyes and turned to leave. The restaurant was unusually full tonight, and she could feel the pressure building. As she walked away, she heard a sharp intake of breath behind her. "That's no way to treat a customer," a woman at a nearby table said, her voice laced with disapproval. "Some people actually work hard for a living." Megan felt a pang of guilt. She knew the woman was right, but she was so caught up in her own frustration that she hadn't considered the impact of her words. She glanced back at Clint, expecting to see anger or disappointment, but his expression was unreadable. "I guess I'm just not like everyone else," he said quietly, a hint of amusement in his voice. He raised his eyes to meet hers, and she felt an inexplicable shiver run down her spine. There was something knowing in that glance that made her uneasy. As Clint took a bite of his burger, Megan had the distinct feeling that something was about to change. A cold dread washed over her, the kind that came before a storm, and she suspected that this time, the storm was heading straight for her. She couldn't shake the feeling that Clint wasn't just a tourist, that he had a deeper, more profound reason for being there. Megan couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time she glanced over at Clint's booth, his eyes were fixed on her, studying her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. She felt like a specimen under a microscope, her flaws laid bare. She sought refuge in the back, joining Danny for a quick break. Danny, a busboy with a heart of gold and a knack for gossip, noticed her distress. "What's wrong, Megan? You look like you've seen a ghost." "That guy," Megan said, nodding toward Clint's booth. "He's creeping me out. He keeps staring at me." Danny leaned closer, his eyes widening. "That's him," he whispered. "That's the owner." Megan's eyes widened. "The owner? I thought he was just some random tourist." "Nope," Danny said, shaking his head. "He comes around every once in a while. Usually unannounced. Nobody really knows much about him. They say he's super rich. But he lives like a regular Joe. Really mysterious." As if on cue, Megan saw Clint Eastwood smile at a small child who had wandered over to his booth. He said something to the child, his face softening in a way she hadn't thought possible. It was a brief, fleeting moment of warmth that contradicted the coldness she had perceived earlier. But it was enough to plant a seed of doubt in her mind. Who was this man, really? Megan forced herself to approach Clint's booth with the bill. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed it on the table. "Here you go," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Clint looked up, his eyes meeting hers with a surprising gentleness. "Thank you," he said, "but before I pay, I have a question for you." Megan braced herself for a reprimand, for a lecture about her attitude. "Okay," she said cautiously. "Do you like your job?" he asked, his voice low and sincere. Megan was taken aback. "What? Do you enjoy working here?" he repeated. "Does it fulfill you in any way?" Megan hesitated. She had never really considered the question before. "It's a job," she said finally. "It pays the bills. But is it what you want to do?" he pressed. "Is it what makes you happy?" Megan bristled at his persistence. "Look," she said, "I don't know you, and I don't need some stranger judging my life choices." Clint chuckled softly. "I'm not judging you, Megan. I'm just asking questions. We all make mistakes. We all have regrets. The important thing is to learn from them and keep moving forward." He then began to share his own story, albeit briefly, about working toward a goal and falling short. He paused, looking at her with a mixture of understanding and encouragement. "Maybe this isn't your passion," he said, "but it doesn't mean you can't find something that is. Don't let bitterness poison your soul." He left a generous tip, far more than the bill warranted. Megan stared at the money, feeling a wave of shame wash over her. She had been so quick to judge him, so quick to dismiss his words. But now, she couldn't help but wonder if he was right. Clint stood up and headed for the door, leaving Megan to grapple with his words. As he approached Carol, the manager, Megan overheard a snippet of their conversation. "Everything okay, Mr. Eastwood?" Carol asked, her voice dripping with respect. "Just checking in, Carol," Clint Eastwood replied. "Keep up the good work." Megan froze, her blood running cold. Mr. Eastwood, that was his name, the owner. The man she had treated with such disrespect was her boss. The man who held her job in his hands. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. She was suddenly a lot less stable. Megan retreated to the women's restroom, her mind racing. She had made a terrible mistake. A career-ending blunder. She imagined the worst-case scenarios, being fired, blacklisted from other restaurants, her life spiraling out of control. She flashed back to a similar incident from her past, a time when her impulsiveness had cost her dearly. The memory was a stark reminder of her tendency to self-sabotage. She was on the verge of a panic attack when Danny knocked on the door. "Megan, you okay in there?" Megan opened the door, her eyes red and swollen. "I screwed up, Danny," she sobbed. "I really screwed up." She poured out the whole story, her voice trembling with fear and regret. Danny listened patiently, offering words of comfort and reassurance. "Look," he said, "maybe it's not as bad as you think. Maybe he's a reasonable guy. You should apologize. Tell him you're sorry." Megan knew he was right. It was the only thing she could do. But the thought of facing Mr. Eastwood filled her with dread. The stakes had never been higher. Megan arrived at work the next day with a knot in her stomach. The atmosphere at Sierra Grill was tense. Carol was pacing back and forth, her face etched with worry. "The owner's doing an inspection today," she announced to the staff. "Everyone needs to be on their best behavior." Megan felt a wave of nausea wash over her. This was it, her moment of reckoning. She imagined Mr. Eastwood scrutinizing her every move, waiting for her to slip up. Her anxiety made her clumsy. She spilled a drink on a particularly important customer, a regular who always left generous tips. The customer erupted in anger, berating Megan in front of the entire restaurant. She felt her face burn with shame. Tears welled up in her eyes. She couldn't take it anymore. She was on the verge of walking out, of giving up on everything. Just when she thought she couldn't handle another moment, Clint Eastwood walked in. He surveyed the scene, his gaze lingering on Megan for a moment before moving on to Carol. Carol approached him, her voice trembling. "Mr. Eastwood," she stammered, "I'm so sorry about the incident with the customer. Megan is usually very reliable, but she's been under a lot of stress lately." Clint nodded, his expression unreadable. He then turned and walked toward Megan, who was standing frozen in place, her eyes fixed on the floor. "Megan," he said softly. She looked up, her heart pounding in her chest. "Mr. Eastwood," she whispered, "I'm so sorry. I was rude to you. I was disrespectful. I understand if you want to fire me." Clint Eastwood looked at her for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. "I'm not going to fire you, Megan," he said finally, "but I'm not going to pretend like nothing happened. You made a mistake. You let your anger get the best of you. But I believe everyone deserves a second chance." He then shared more details on a past mistake he made, and asked her to learn and grow from this. Megan felt a mix of relief and disbelief wash over her. "Thank you," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I won't let you down." Clint smiled. "I know you won't," he said. "Now go out there and show me what you can do." The relief she felt was palpable, as if a physical weight had been lifted from her chest. But she knew that this was just the beginning. She had a long way to go to earn his trust and prove that she deserved this second chance. Megan's transformation didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, arduous process, fraught with challenges and setbacks. She learned that being patient with difficult customers was an art form, a delicate dance between empathy and assertiveness. It wasn't about being a pushover, it was about understanding where people were coming from, recognizing their frustrations, and finding a way to diffuse the situation without sacrificing her own dignity. She started to pay closer attention to the small details, the subtle cues that revealed a customer's mood or needs. She noticed the harried mother struggling to keep her children in line, the lonely senior citizen seeking companionship, the young couple celebrating a special occasion. She began to tailor her approach to each individual, offering a kind word, a listening ear, or a complimentary dessert. One day, a customer snapped at her for taking too long to bring his coffee. Megan felt the familiar surge of anger rising within her, the urge to lash out and defend herself. But then she remembered Clint's words, "Don't let bitterness poison your soul." She took a deep breath and forced herself to smile. "I'm so sorry for the delay, sir," she said. "We're a little short-staffed today, but I promise to make it up to you. How about a free pastry on the house?" The customer, taken aback by her unexpected kindness, hesitated for a moment, then grudgingly accepted her offer. As Megan walked away, she realized that she had turned a potential conflict into an opportunity for connection. She also sought guidance from Carol, who, to Megan's surprise, became a valuable mentor. Carol shared her own experiences, revealing the challenges she had faced in her career and the strategies she had used to overcome them. She taught Megan the importance of setting boundaries, of standing up for herself, and of finding joy in her work. The change in Megan's attitude had a profound impact on the atmosphere at Sierra Grill. The customers were happier, the staff was more cohesive, and the overall energy was more positive. Megan found herself genuinely enjoying her job, connecting with people, and making a difference in their lives. One day, a regular customer, a successful entrepreneur named Mr. Thompson, approached Megan with an offer. He had been impressed by her work ethic and her customer service skills, and he wanted to offer her a position at his company, a fast-growing tech startup. The pay is significantly better, and the benefits are excellent. Mr. Thompson said, "I think you have the potential to do great things. Megan, you're smart, hardworking, and you have a natural ability to connect with people." Megan was flattered and tempted. The offer represented a chance to escape the drudgery of the service industry, to build a real career, and to finally achieve financial security. She wrestled with the decision for days, weighing the pros and cons. Ultimately, she turned down the offer. She realized that she wasn't ready to leave Sierra Grill. She had invested too much time and energy into her personal growth, and she felt a sense of loyalty to the restaurant and its staff. She wanted to continue learning, to continue making a difference, and to continue honing her skills. She also realized that the money and stability weren't the only things that mattered to her. Megan started to believe in herself, in her potential. She had overcome her anger and resentment, and she had transformed herself into a positive, compassionate, and capable individual. She had found a sense of purpose and meaning in her work, and she was determined to continue on this path. The news of Megan's transformation reached Clint Eastwood. He had been watching her progress from afar, observing her interactions with customers and her relationships with her coworkers. He was impressed by her resilience, her humility, and her unwavering commitment to improvement. Carol pulled Megan aside one afternoon, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Mr. Eastwood was asking about you," she said. "He told me to tell you that he's noticed a real improvement in your attitude and your work ethic. He said you've become an asset to Sierra Grill. He's proud of you." Megan felt a surge of pride and gratitude. Clint's acknowledgement meant the world to her. She had worked so hard to earn his trust, and his words validated her efforts. She wanted to show him that she was worthy of his belief, that she could continue to grow and develop. She started to take on more responsibility at work, volunteering to train new employees, to resolve customer complaints, and to assist Carol with administrative tasks. She became a mentor to other waitresses, sharing her experiences, offering advice, and providing encouragement. She emphasized the importance of empathy, of teamwork, and of finding joy in the work, no matter how challenging it might be. One morning, Megan received a letter in the mail. The return address was unfamiliar, but the handwriting was recognizable. It was from the customer whose drink she had spilled weeks earlier, the one who had berated her in front of the entire restaurant. Megan hesitated to open the letter, fearing the worst, but curiosity got the better of her, and she carefully tore open the envelope. Inside, she found a handwritten note. "Dear Megan, I wanted to apologize for my behavior at Sierra Grill a few weeks ago. I was rude, disrespectful, and completely out of line. I was having a bad day, and I took it out on you, which was unfair and inexcusable. I've been thinking about that incident ever since. I've realized that you handled the situation with grace and professionalism. Despite my appalling behavior, you turned a bad situation into a positive experience. You reminded me that even small acts of kindness can make a big difference. Thank you for your patience, your understanding, and your willingness to forgive me. You've inspired me to be a better person. Sincerely, Mr. Davis." Tears welled up in Megan's eyes. She was deeply moved by the letter, by Mr. Davis's willingness to acknowledge his mistakes and to express his gratitude. She realized that her transformation had not only changed her own life, but it had also touched the lives of others. She shared the letter with Danny, who was ecstatic for her. Their friendship had deepened over the past few weeks, and they had become each other's confidants. They often spent their breaks talking about their dreams, their fears, and their hopes for the future. As Megan continued to grow and evolve, she began to reflect on her long-forgotten dreams. She had always wanted to be a writer, to tell stories that would inspire and uplift people. But somewhere along the way, she had lost sight of that goal. She had become so focused on surviving, on paying the bills, that she had forgotten about her passion. Inspired by her recent experiences, Megan decided to start writing again. She bought a small notebook and a pen, and she began to scribble down her thoughts and feelings during her breaks. She wrote about her childhood, her struggles, her triumphs, and her hopes for the future. She found that the act of writing helped her to process her emotions, to make sense of her experiences, and to connect with her inner self. Then, a difficult situation arose at work. Carol had to take an unexpected leave of absence to care for her ailing mother. Clint Eastwood offered Megan the position of interim manager, a role that would come with more responsibility, more prestige, and more money, but it would also require her to put her writing on hold, to sacrifice her creative aspirations. Megan was torn. She knew that becoming a manager would provide her with more security and stability, but it would also stifle her passion and prevent her from pursuing her dreams. She wrestled with the decision for weeks, seeking advice from Danny, Carol, and even Clint himself. Finally, Megan sought out Clint, needing a final sounding board. She explained her dilemma, her conflicting desires, her fear of making the wrong decision. Clint listened patiently, his eyes filled with understanding. When she finished, he said, "The most important thing is that you're happy, Megan, that you're living a life that is meaningful to you. Don't let fear dictate your choices. Don't be afraid to take risks. Don't be afraid to fail. Just keep moving forward, and trust that everything will work out the way it's supposed to." He continued, "The managerial position is a good step. But is it what you truly desire, Megan? Or is it a safety net? Is it something you think you should do, rather than what you want to do? Listen to that inner voice, because it's leading you to your destiny." Megan pondered his words, letting them sink into her soul. She knew that Clint was right. She had been letting fear guide her decisions for too long. She had been playing it safe, sacrificing her dreams for the sake of security. She took a deep breath and made her choice. She politely declined the position of interim manager, explaining to Clint Eastwood that she needed to focus on her writing. He understood and respected her decision. Megan continued to work at Sierra Grill, but she approached her job with a newfound sense of purpose and passion. She used her breaks to write, jotting down ideas, crafting stories, and honing her skills. She also began to share her writing with others, joining a local writing group and submitting her work to literary magazines. One day, a literary agent contacted her, expressing interest in her work. He had read one of her stories online and was impressed by her unique voice and her ability to connect with readers. He offered to represent her, to help her find a publisher, and to launch her career as a writer. Megan was overjoyed. Her dream was finally coming true. As she greeted a new customer at Sierra Grill, ready to create a positive experience, she glanced up at the faded photograph on the wall. Now, when she looked at it, she saw not just a reminder of the past, but a symbol of hope and a testament to the power of second chances. She smiled, knowing that her journey was just beginning. She had found her voice, her purpose, and her path, and she was ready to share her stories with the world. The restaurant remained a symbol for her, a constant reminder that hard work, kindness, and the willingness to learn can transform a life, one act at a time.
The biting Washington, D.C. wind howled like a banshee, whipping snow against the granite walls of the United States Secret Service headquarters. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with the usual tension, amplified by the ferocity of the storm raging outside. Agents hunched over monitors, their faces illuminated by the cold glow of security feeds, while others barked orders into phones, their voices clipped and urgent. A low hum of anxiety thrummed through the building, a constant reminder of the lives they were sworn to protect. Then, the impossible happened. A sudden, jarring blare ripped through the tense quiet. The building's alarm system screaming red alert. Agents scrambled, adrenaline surging, weapons drawn as they braced for an attack. But the monitors remained blank. No sign of an intruder. A collective sigh of frustrated relief rippled through the room as the all-clear was sounded. A false alarm attributed to the storm's interference. Before the agents could fully return to their routines, the heavy, reinforced doors of the headquarters swung open, revealing a figure silhouetted against the swirling snow. Donald Trump, the former president, stepped inside, his presence electrifying the room. He was alone, no security detail, his trademark confidence radiating from him like heat from a furnace. The room fell silent, every eye fixed on the unexpected visitor. Agents froze mid-task, exchanging confused glances. No one had been notified of his arrival. A voice, finally breaking the stunned silence, belonged to a young agent named Miller. "Mr. Trump, what brings you here?" Trump scanned the room, his gaze sharp and penetrating, lingering on each face before settling on Miller. His voice, firm and unwavering, cut through the silence. "I need to find someone. An agent who saved my life years ago. But his name has been erased from every record. I won't leave here until I know the truth." A heavy silence settled over the room, thicker than the falling snow outside. Someone had saved Trump's life? And that person was deliberately removed from all official records? Was he searching for a forgotten hero? Or about to expose a secret that was never meant to be found? The question hung in the air, a chilling premonition of the storm that was about to break inside the Secret Service headquarters. "Tell me more, Mr. President," Jonathan Reyes, the director of the Secret Service, said, his voice steady but laced with curiosity. He was a seasoned leader, having served under multiple administrations, and he had seen more than his share of unusual events. But this, Trump walking into headquarters unannounced, demanding answers about a ghost from his past, this was unprecedented. Trump nodded, his gaze distant, as if peering into a long-forgotten memory. "It was 1982. He began, his voice softening slightly. "I was a young businessman, expanding my empire. Success, I thought, was measured in numbers, skyscrapers, million-dollar deals. I never imagined that one night I'd be standing face to face with death." He paused, the room holding its breath, and began to recount the events of that fateful night in New York City. He had just left an important meeting and was driving home, unaware that he was being watched. As he turned into a narrow, dimly lit alley, an SUV suddenly swerved in front of him, blocking his path. Before he could react, 4 men emerged from the vehicle, all armed. "They threw me to the ground," Trump continued, his voice dropping lower, each word cutting through the silence like a blade. "One of them pressed a gun against my head. I remember exactly what he said." Trump clenched his jaw, the cold steel of the gun seemingly pressed against his skin once more. "You think you can walk into our world without paying the price?" "Trump?" Reyes frowned. "Do you know who they were?" Trump shook his head. "At the time, I had no idea, but later, I learned the truth. They were part of a powerful criminal organization, controlling entire industries in New York's underground. Without knowing it, I had stepped into their territory. And that night, they planned to teach me a lesson, or end my story for good." His voice dropped to a near whisper. "If it hadn't been for that man, I wouldn't be standing here today." The agents exchanged glances, the weight of Trump's words sinking in. A businessman, ambushed in the heart of New York, threatened with execution. This was no ordinary crime. It was a hit, orchestrated by forces far more dangerous. "What man, sir?" Reyes asked, his eyes searching Trump's face for any sign of hesitation. Trump took a deep breath, as if steadying himself before speaking. "Just when I thought it was over," a voice rang out from the darkness. He closed his eyes, reliving the moment. "Drop your weapons. If you don't, there won't be a second warning." The tension in the room grew palpable. One of them laughed, tightened his grip on the trigger. But before he could pull it, a bullet tore through his hand. A gunshot echoed through the alley. And then, out of nowhere, I saw a figure emerge from the shadows, moving faster than anyone could react. Trump paused, his gaze sweeping across the room, eyes cold and sharp. He was an undercover Secret Service agent. Alone, he took on 4 armed men. Wounded, outnumbered, but he didn't stop. He pulled me up, dragged me into another alley, and got me out of there. Blood soaked through his coat. But he didn't care. He only cared about getting me to safety. The agents stood frozen, absorbing the weight of his words. When I tried to ask his name, he only said one thing: never let them win. I never saw him again. The next day, I tried to find out who he was. But no one knew. No records. No traces. It was as if he never existed. Director Reyes exchanged glances with several agents. Sir, do you remember anything else? Anything at all that could help us identify him? Trump nodded. He had a long scar on his left hand. I remember it clearly because when he pulled me to run, I saw it up close. And before he disappeared into the night, he said one name: Shadow 1. The room went still. A few agents exchanged uneasy whispers. Reyes took a deep breath. Shadow 1 is not just a name. Sir. Trump narrowed his eyes. What do you mean? Reyes crossed his arms, his voice lower, more serious. I've been in this agency for over 20 years. And that name, I've only heard it once in my entire career. It's a ghost story whispered in the dark corners of the agency. Trump held his gaze. I don't care what happened. I just want one thing. Find him. Or at least, find the truth. A heavy silence filled the room. Finally, Reyes gave a slow nod. If he ever existed, we'll find him. But deep down, Reyes knew that this search was not just about finding a man. It was about unlocking a door that many had tried to keep shut for decades. And once that door opened, no one could predict what would come next. Director Jonathan Reyes stood still for a moment before signaling to the agents in the room. Instantly, the atmosphere shifted, conversations halted, fingers flew across keyboards, and stacks of old files were pulled from archives. The search had begun. Everyone understood one thing. If the name, Shadow 1, had been erased from history, this would not be an easy mission. Trump crossed his arms, his eyes locked on the computer screen as lines of data scrolled past. Tell me, Reyes, how does a man who saved my life disappear as if he never existed? Reyes didn't answer immediately. He turned to the agent handling classified records. A young man in a black suit with thick-rimmed glasses. Run a full personnel search. Cross-check every classified file, even those that have been encrypted or deleted under government orders. The agent nodded, fingers moving rapidly across the keyboard. Strings of code flashed on the screen, searching through decades of government records. Then, after a long pause, he looked up, his face grim. There's nothing. No one under the alias, Shadow 1. Any record of deep cover agents from the 1980s has either been sealed or completely wiped. If someone ever held that title, they didn't want to be found. Trump frowned. What about off-the-record files? Former agents who served but are no longer in the system. Reyes hesitated for a moment, then turned to a female agent standing in the corner. Get in touch with Michael Hayes. He worked in deep cover operations and retired in 1995. If anyone remembers Shadow 1, it's him. An hour later, Trump and Reyes sat inside a reinforced SUV, driving toward a quiet suburban neighborhood in Virginia. Michael Hayes had once been a legend in the intelligence community. Now, he was just an aging man, living a reclusive life in a small, weathered house. Reyes knocked on the door. No answer. Trump glanced around. The house looked old, but the windows had reinforced locks. A man like Hayes wouldn't live without precautions. Reyes knocked harder. Michael, open the door. We need to talk. A deep, raspy voice came from inside. Go away. I don't have anything to do with you people anymore. Trump took a step forward, his voice firm but laced with sincerity. This isn't about you. It's about a man who disappeared. A Secret Service agent once known as Shadow 1. Inside, there was silence. Then, a soft click. The door creaked open slightly, revealing Michael Hayes. Though well into his 60s, he still carried the presence of a man who had spent his life in the shadows. His sharp eyes studied Trump, but there was something else beneath them. Something that told Trump this man had seen more than anyone should ever have to bear. Hayes crossed his arms, his voice edged with skepticism. If you're here asking about Shadow 1, that means you're either incredibly stupid, or you have no idea what you're walking into. Reyes spoke calmly but firmly. Tell us the truth. Hayes exhaled heavily, then stepped back and motioned for them to come inside. The living room was small, cluttered with old papers and faded photographs lining the walls. Trump's gaze moved across them until it landed on one particular photo. An old group picture of agents in black suits standing in formation. Faces stern and composed, but one man stood slightly apart. His eyes not focused on the camera. Trump pointed at him. Is that him? Hayes remained silent for a long moment. Then finally nodded. Yes, but his name wasn't always Shadow One. He had a real name once. Though by now, I doubt anyone remembers it. Reyes spoke slowly, deliberately. We need to find him. Hayes locked eyes with Trump. If you're serious about finding him, remember this. There's a reason he disappeared. And if you start digging into this past, there will be people who don't want you to find the truth. Trump didn't flinch. I owe him my life. No matter who I have to face, I won't stop. Hayes studied him for a long moment, then let out a heavy sigh. He stood up, disappeared into another room, and returned holding a worn-out envelope. Sealed in protective plastic, he set it on the table. This is all I have left of him. But be careful, Trump. Some debts are too great to be repaid without consequences. Trump took the envelope and slowly opened it. Inside was an old photograph, the edges frayed with time, and a classified government file, still stamped with an official seal. The secret of Shadow One was about to be uncovered. He carefully opened it, revealing an old, worn photograph. In the picture, a man in a black suit stood among a group of Secret Service agents. But unlike the others, his sharp eyes weren't looking at the camera. He was watching something beyond the frame, as if anticipating a threat no one else could see. Faintly printed below the image were the words, David Cole, United States Secret Service. Trump turned to Michael Hayes, his voice slow but firm. Is this him? Hayes nodded. His real name was David Cole, one of the best agents I ever knew. But he wasn't just any agent. Reyes frowned. Hayes took a deep breath, his aging eyes reflecting a weight only a few could understand. David didn't just work for the Secret Service. He infiltrated one of the most powerful criminal syndicates in the country. He took on assignments no one else dared to. He gathered evidence of corruption at the highest levels, illegal deals between the government and underground organizations. Trump tightened his grip on the photograph. So that's why he was erased from the system. Hayes nodded. No one wanted a man like David Cole to exist. The people in power made sure his name would never appear in any official record. Reyes crossed his arms, his voice low and steady. If he's still alive, why hasn't anyone been able to find him? Hayes locked eyes with Trump. Because he doesn't want to be found. Or worse, someone made sure he never would be. Silence filled the room. Then, Trump rose from his chair, determination burning in his eyes. We're going to find him. Hayes exhaled heavily. If you're that determined, I have a lead, but it's not safe. Trump didn't hesitate. I don't care. 3 days later, Trump and Reyes arrived at a remote area on the outskirts of Chicago. The night was bitterly cold, the wind sharp as a knife, and the narrow dirt road led them deep into a dense forest, where a small wooden cabin stood in isolation. Reyes instinctively reached for the firearm at his waist, then motioned for Trump to stay back. We don't know who's in there. Let me go in first. Trump shook his head. I'll speak to him myself. They approached the door. Reyes knocked firmly 3 times. No answer. Trump stepped forward, his voice cutting through the darkness. David Cole, I know you're in there. Silence. Then, a faint click. The door creaked open just slightly, and a pair of wary, aged eyes peered out from the shadows. David Cole. His face was gaunt, his beard streaked with silver, his frame leaner than the man in the photograph. But his eyes, those same piercing, battle-hardened eyes had not changed. He was still a man who had once stood at the edge of life and death. Trump met his gaze, unwavering. I've been looking for you for 40 years. David remained silent for a long moment, then slowly pushed the door open wider. If you've made it this far, it means you truly want answers. Inside the cabin, the dim glow of an old lamp cast long shadows across the room. Stacks of yellowed newspapers and scattered documents covered the table, the headlines revealing traces of past political scandals. Names Trump recognized, yet details he had never seen made public. David sat down, his eyes never leaving Trump. I saved you that night because I knew if you died, the story would end there. But I never expected you'd be the one to come looking for me. Trump clenched his fist. Why did you disappear? David let out a quiet, humorless laugh. Because I got too close to the truth. I held evidence no one wanted to see. And when I was ready to expose it, they set me up, a staged attack, a secret arrest warrant, and overnight, I became no one. Trump's voice dropped, steady and resolute. I can't change the past. But I can fix what was done to you. David raised an eyebrow. And what exactly do you think you can do? Trump rose from his seat, determination burning in his eyes. I will bring your name back. I will make sure the world knows who you were and what you did. David shook his head. You don't understand, Trump. The people behind this, they still hold power. If you dig up the past, you won't just be putting me in danger, you'll be risking yourself too. Trump held his gaze, unwavering. I'm not afraid. A long silence filled the room. Then, David exhaled, as if releasing the weight of 40 years. He stood up, walked toward an old wooden cabinet in the corner, and pulled it open. From inside, he retrieved a small metal box, setting it on the table in front of Trump. If you're really going to do this, then here's everything I've kept for 40 years. Trump unlocked the box. Inside were classified documents, audio recordings, and photographs, evidence of everything David had uncovered before he vanished. Reyes scanned the files, his expression shifting. He turned to Trump, his voice barely a whisper. If this is real, it could change everything. Trump nodded, his resolve unshaken. Then we're doing it. David studied him for a moment. Then, for the first time in their conversation, he smiled. You really don't know when to quit, do you? Trump's response was simple, yet unwavering. Men like you don't deserve to be forgotten. And I'll make sure that never happens. The battle to bring the truth into the light had officially begun. The cabin felt charged with the weight of decades of secrets, the air thick with anticipation and a sense of impending danger. David Cole sat in his small cabin, staring at the metal box on the table. Inside it lay a part of his life that had been buried. A past filled with secrets that could change everything. For 40 years, no one had dared to touch it. No one had dared to speak the truth. Now, the possibility of exposure loomed, promising both liberation and peril. Trump stood beside him, his gaze unwavering. If you're ready, I'll make sure the world knows what happened. David slowly closed the box. Once this gets out, there's no turning back. Trump didn't blink. I've never been one to back down. Silence filled the room. Then, after a long pause, David gave a slow nod. All right, let's do this. 4 days later, in Washington, D.C., a press conference was held right in front of the United States Secret Service headquarters. Cameras from every major news outlet focused on the podium. Trump stepped forward, his demeanor serious and resolute. Behind him, slightly to the side, David Cole stood in silence, facing the public for the first time in 4 decades. Trump scanned the crowd, then spoke, his voice unwavering. Today, I stand here to tell the story of a man America should never have forgotten. A man who was willing to sacrifice everything for justice, only to be erased from history. A man named. The entire room went silent, every reporter leaning forward, their pens poised to capture every word. Trump continued, his voice filled with righteous indignation. David Cole, a former Secret Service agent, dedicated his entire career to fighting against corruption and evil. But when he got too close to the truth, those in power made him disappear. They thought that by erasing his name from every record, they could make the world forget him. But today, I stand here to tell them, they were wrong. He turned to David, his gaze filled with respect. You were forced to live in the shadows for too long. But from this moment forward, America will remember your name. David looked at Trump, saying nothing, but in his eyes, something had shifted, a weight lifted, a sense of relief he hadn't felt in 40 years. A single tear trickled down his weathered cheek. Trump proceeded to lay out the evidence. The contents of the metal box brought to life with chilling detail. He spoke of the criminal syndicate, their control over industries, and their ties to powerful figures within the government. He spoke of David's bravery, his unwavering commitment to justice, and the price he had paid for daring to expose the truth. The room crackled with energy. Reporters scribbling furiously, cameras flashing, their lenses hungry for every detail. The revelations were explosive, shaking the foundations of the established order. Questions erupted from the crowd. A chaotic chorus of disbelief and outrage. Mr. Trump, is this true? Do you have proof? Mr. Cole, what do you have to say for yourself? Mr. President, what are the names of the individuals involved? Trump held up his hand, silencing the clamor. The evidence speaks for itself. The investigation will reveal the truth. Justice will be served. The next day, the story of David Cole dominated the headlines. The news spread like wildfire, igniting a firestorm of public outrage and demands for justice. The individuals implicated in the scandal scrambled to defend themselves, issuing denials and launching counterattacks. But the evidence was overwhelming. The sitting president, caught in the crossfire, was forced to act. He immediately launched an independent investigation, vowing to uncover the truth and hold those responsible accountable. Those accused of corruption started falling like dominoes. Arrests were made, resignations tendered, and reputations shattered. The carefully constructed edifice of power that had protected them for so long began to crumble. Amidst the chaos, one thing remained clear. David Cole had been vindicated. His name, once erased from history, was now synonymous with courage and integrity. The quiet cabin in the woods, a place of refuge and exile, became a symbol of resilience and hope. The investigation into the scandal dragged on for months, uncovering a web of corruption that extended far beyond what anyone had initially imagined. The sitting president signed a special executive order. David Cole's honor was officially restored. He was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, one of the highest honors a U.S. citizen could receive. A ceremony was held at the Secret Service headquarters, a place that had once denied his existence. David's name was engraved on the Wall of Honor alongside other agents who had dedicated their lives to protecting the nation. A testament to his bravery and sacrifice. As David stepped forward to receive the medal, the entire hall rose to their feet, applauding. He was no longer a ghost, a forgotten footnote in history. He was a hero. And finally, America knew it. Trump, standing beside David, clasped his hand warmly. You have waited long enough, David. But Trump wasn't done yet. 1 week later, the David Cole Foundation was established, a scholarship fund dedicated to supporting former agents and their families in times of hardship, ensuring that their sacrifices would never be forgotten. News stations across the country reported on the event, and David Cole's story spread like wildfire. Other forgotten agents, those who had sacrificed in silence, were finally being remembered, their stories being told. David stood by the window of his small home, watching the golden sunlight filter through the glass. For the first time in years, he felt like he truly existed, no longer a phantom haunting the margins of society. The years of isolation and hardship had taken their toll, but his eyes still held that same piercing intensity, that same unwavering commitment to justice that had defined his life. As Trump prepared to leave after a final visit, David spoke only one sentence, his voice filled with emotion. Thank you, Trump, not for the honor, but for remembering me. Trump simply nodded, his expression sincere. Men like you should never be forgotten. And with that, he walked away, leaving behind a man, a story, and a legacy that the world would never forget. David Cole's story is more than just the tale of a forgotten agent. It is a reminder that in the face of power and silence, there are still those who stand for justice. But more importantly, it shows us that a single act of kindness and an overdue thank you can change the course of someone's life. David Cole dedicated his entire life to protecting his country. Yet for 40 years, no one knew of his sacrifice. If Trump hadn't searched for him, his story might have remained buried forever. How many others out there have given everything yet never been recognized? How many heroes have gone unnoticed, their legacies fading into silence? Today, we may not be fighting great battles, but every day we have the chance to remember and honor those who have sacrificed for us. People like David Cole. If someone has ever helped you, find them, thank them before it's too late. Don't let their kindness, their sacrifice, be forgotten. And if this story moved you, share it. Let more people know that justice exists only when someone is brave enough to stand up for it. Together, we can keep stories like this alive. This is just a first draft, of course. Feel free to modify and adjust it to better fit your vision for the story. I tried to incorporate as many elements as possible, including suspense, emotional moments, and a positive, meaningful message. I hope you find it useful. Good luck with your writing. The kitchen was cold and dimly lit. Sofia Vargas sat at the table, her fingers tracing the edge of a chipped mug. The electricity had been cut off for 2 days now, and the only light came from a flickering candle. Mateo, her young son, sat across from her, clutching his inhaler. His chest was tight, and she could see the panic in his eyes. They were already out of the medicine he needed to manage his asthma, and the new prescription was far beyond what they could afford. Sofia's life had been a series of struggles. After her divorce from a man who had promised her the world, she found herself alone, raising 2 children while working long, grueling hours as a night shift employee at McDonald's. She hated how her life had turned out, but the thought of giving up on her kids kept her moving forward, even when the weight of the world seemed too much to bear. Her ex-husband had disappeared after their divorce, leaving no support, no explanation, and certainly no way to help with the bills. Sofia's hands were tied. The bill for the phone was due, and she had no way of paying it. Everything felt like it was slipping away. The harsh reality of her situation crashed into her as she looked at Mateo. She could see his frail body struggling to breathe, and the helplessness she felt gnawed at her. Could she really keep him safe? Could she protect him from the world that seemed so unforgiving? The only thing she had was her resilience, the belief that somehow, someway, she would make it through. But the fear of what might happen if she didn't keep pushing haunted her every day. The night was like any other at McDonald's. Sofia moved through the shift mechanically, serving food, taking orders, cleaning up. It was exhausting, and the pay barely covered their basic needs. But then, something unexpected happened. A man walked into the restaurant. It wasn't just any man, it was Elon Musk, the billionaire entrepreneur she had seen on TV but never imagined she would encounter in real life. He walked up to the counter, glancing distractedly at the menu. Sofia had no idea why he was there, but as he reached for his wallet, he froze, his expression shifting to frustration. "I must have left my wallet in the car," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. Sofia saw the irritation in his eyes, but instead of turning him away, something inside her moved. She couldn't afford to give away free food, but she knew he was in a bind. "Don't worry about it, I've got it covered," she said before she could second-guess herself. Elon blinked, clearly surprised by her generosity. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice softening. "Of course," she replied with a smile, though she was secretly hoping her small act of kindness wouldn't come back to haunt her. As he paid for his meal, their eyes met. For a brief moment, something flickered between them, a quiet connection that left Sofia feeling uneasy. There was something about him, something familiar. But it wasn't until he left that she realized what it was. He had looked at her the way her ex-husband used to, with that same fleeting glance of recognition and maybe something more. Before she could dwell on it, Elon was gone, but his presence lingered in her thoughts. Why had she done it? Why did she feel this strange pull? Little did she know, that moment would change everything. The following day, Sofia's life was thrown into chaos. A video had gone viral, a recording of the moment she had helped Elon Musk, taken by the security cameras inside the McDonald's. At first, she didn't think much of it, but soon, her phone began to buzz with notifications. Social media was ablaze with the video. People were praising her for her kindness. But there was also a dark side to the attention. Comments ranged from admiration to judgment, from hope to suspicion. Elena, her elderly neighbor, had warned her about the dangers of fame. "Be careful, Sofia. The internet can be a cruel place. You don't know who's watching," she had cautioned. But Sofia had never expected something like this to happen. She wasn't trying to make a name for herself, she had simply wanted to help someone in need. But it wasn't just the praise that made her uneasy. It was the messages. There were those who called her a saint, but others began sending strange, threatening notes. One even included a warning: "You're being watched. Don't trust anyone." The fear crept in, and the uncertainty followed her everywhere. As if that wasn't enough, Sofia received a call from Mr. Harding, her boss at McDonald's. His voice was cold, filled with suspicion. "We need to talk about your actions yesterday. We've received several complaints. You're in trouble." Sofia felt her stomach drop. The praise she had received online meant nothing now. All that mattered was how her employer would react. The confrontation with Mr. Harding was quick and brutal. "You violated company policy," he said. "You gave away food, and that can't happen again. I'm afraid I have to let you go." Sophia's heart sank as she stood there, stunned. She had just lost her job over trying to help someone in need. It felt like the world had turned against her. As she walked out of the McDonald's building, a feeling of emptiness washed over her. She wasn't sure what to do next. Her options were limited, and she didn't know where to turn. That's when her phone buzzed again. A text message from an unknown number. "I saw your story. I can help you make money from this. There's an opportunity waiting for you, but it'll cost you a small upfront fee." Sophia's first instinct was to delete the message. It seemed like a scam, but desperation made her hesitate. Was this her chance to turn things around? Or was it just another trap? Alina's voice echoed in her mind, warning her to be careful. But Sophia didn't know if she could afford to be cautious anymore. Sophia couldn't shake the feeling of dread that followed the message. The days passed slowly, filled with uncertainty. Her electricity remained off, and the stress of her situation weighed on her. Her kids, unaware of how bad things had gotten, continued with their daily routines. But Sophia couldn't stop thinking about the job offer. It was tempting. It promised a way out. But at what cost? Then, just when she thought things couldn't get worse, another message appeared. "Meet me at Tesla headquarters in Palo Alto at 10 a.m. I have an offer you can't refuse." Sophia's mind raced. Was this a real opportunity? Or was she walking into another trap? She couldn't tell. But the idea of a job, an actual chance to make things better, was too enticing to ignore. Yet, a part of her hesitated. What if this was just another scam? What if she was being manipulated? She thought about Matteo, about the way his chest had tightened in the night, and how she had no way to help him. She thought about her daughter and how she couldn't let them grow up in this situation. With a deep breath, she decided to take the risk. This might be the only chance she had to change their lives. Tesla headquarters was everything Sophia had imagined it would be: sleek, modern, filled with innovation. But as she stepped inside, the weight of the situation pressed down on her. Tanya, a representative from Elon Musk's office, greeted her warmly and led her through the building. But Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. During the tour, she noticed something strange: a hidden camera in a room she was led into. It was small, tucked away in a corner, but it was there. Sophia's heart raced. Had she been followed here? Was this all just part of a larger plan? Later, Tanya offered her a position at Tesla, something she had never expected. But there was one condition: she had to work closely with Elon himself. It sounded too good to be true, and Sophia couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that this was all somehow connected to the viral video. When Sophia returned home, Elena was waiting for her, looking uneasy. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice trembling. "I wasn't just a neighbor. I was hired by Elon to watch you." Sophia's world shattered. Elena, the woman she had trusted, had been spying on her all along. Everything that had happened, every decision, every encounter, was part of a plan that Sophia didn't fully understand. The interview with Elon Musk was intense. He was charming, persuasive, and seemed to believe in Sophia's potential. But Sophia's doubts only grew. Could she trust him? Could she trust anything anymore? As she toured the Tesla facility, memories of her mother began to surface. Her mother had always told her to be strong, to fight through the hardest times. Sophia had never fully understood those lessons until now. Her mother had been a survivor, and Sophia had to be, too. She had come too far to let fear control her. But despite her resolve, Sophia couldn't escape the suspicion gnawing at her. Was Elon truly offering her a chance? Or was this just another manipulation? The tension between them was palpable as they sat down to talk about the job. Sophia asked the question she had been holding back. "Why me? What makes me different?" Elon's answer was vague, but it didn't matter. Sophia knew she couldn't let this chance slip away. The future of her family depended on it. Sophia's relationship with Daniel Hayes, a fellow employee at Tesla, began to grow stronger. They spent long hours together, discussing their personal lives and ambitions. Daniel seemed to genuinely care about her, and for the first time in a long while, Sophia felt seen. But as their connection deepened, Sophia began to notice unsettling things. Daniel seemed more interested in her past than her present. He asked probing questions about her marriage, her divorce, and the choices she had made. One evening, after a heated argument about his intrusive questions, Daniel confessed, "I care about you, Sophia, but I can't help myself. I'm obsessed with the mystery of who you are." The words stung. Sophia realized that Daniel's affection was tied not just to her, but to the story she represented. She wasn't sure if their relationship was real or if she had just become another mystery for him to solve. The story continues as Sophia navigates her new life with Tesla. The complex relationships and the challenges ahead, each decision she makes becomes more crucial than ever, as the stakes keep rising and the lines between trust and betrayal blur. Sophia had barely settled into her new role at Tesla, but the pressure was already mounting. The company, with its sleek offices and high-stakes atmosphere, demanded perfection, and the once hopeful spark in Sophia began to flicker under the weight of expectations. She had always been the kind of person who wanted to help others. But in the corporate world, her kindness was starting to become a liability. At Tesla, the competition was fierce. Everyone was vying for recognition, and small mistakes were treated like huge setbacks. One day, during a routine project, Sophia, in an effort to assist her colleagues, took the initiative to help out with a task that wasn't even her responsibility. She thought she was being helpful, solving a problem before it became a bigger issue. But her actions inadvertently set the project back. The work she had interrupted had to be redone. And now, the team was facing a serious delay. Her heart sank as she sat across from Elon, who was visibly frustrated. "Sophia, I understand you wanted to help, but you can't just jump into things without knowing what you're doing," he said, his voice calm but filled with a tinge of disappointment. "This isn't just about being nice. It's about being strategic and focused." The words stung more than she wanted to admit. Sophia had been trying so hard to prove herself. She thought kindness could make a difference, that it would be enough. But in this world, it seemed, it wasn't enough to be kind, you had to be ruthless. Calculated. She left the office feeling crushed. Maybe she wasn't cut out for this. Maybe her kindness, her willingness to go above and beyond, wasn't the strength she had always believed it to be. Just when things were at their darkest, an unexpected opportunity arose. Tesla's project was in danger of a catastrophic failure. The timeline had already been delayed, and the pressure was mounting. It was a make or break moment, and the team needed a miracle. That's when Daniel stepped in. Despite their rocky relationship, despite their differences, Daniel and Sophia knew that they had to set aside their personal issues if they were going to make it through this crisis. They worked side by side, long hours blending their ideas, their strategies, their determination. There was no room for error. The work was grueling, the stress unbearable, but Sophia could see something in Daniel that she hadn't seen before, a drive, a focus that matched her own. They were unstoppable together. And when they finally solved the problem, when the project was back on track, Sophia felt a surge of pride. It wasn't just about saving the project, it was about proving to herself that she could still make a difference in this harsh world. Elon praised them both, but Sophia knew that the real victory wasn't in his approval, it was in the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had stood tall. Even when everything seemed to be falling apart. After the storm passed, Sophia began to reflect on everything that had happened. She had survived, yes, but at what cost? The corporate world was ruthless, and Tesla had offered her opportunities, but it had also stripped away some of the very qualities she had once believed in: compassion, kindness, and the desire to help others. It was in those moments of quiet reflection that Sophia realized what her true calling was. She couldn't ignore the way her heart ached for the mothers in her community. The ones who, like her, were struggling to make ends meet. There were so many single mothers like her, fighting to stay afloat, yet feeling invisible in a world that didn't care. And so, she took the first step. She started a program for single mothers, offering them the help and support they needed. It wasn't much at first, just a few resources, a network of women trying to make it work. But soon, it grew, and more women joined. Sophia felt a sense of fulfillment she hadn't known before. This, she realized, was where she truly belonged, helping others find their way, just as she had done. Daniel stood by her side, supporting her every step of the way. The bond between them had deepened, built on shared experiences and mutual respect. They weren't just partners in business anymore, they were partners in life. Together, they changed the lives of the women in their community, proving that even in the darkest times, hope could flourish. Months passed, and Sophia's life had changed dramatically. The once struggling single mother was now a beacon of hope for others. Her work with the program had gained attention, and soon, Tesla recognized her efforts. She was invited to speak at company events, and her story became an inspiration to those who were still trying to make it. At Tesla's annual gala, Sophia was honored for her achievements. Elon Musk himself stood before her, acknowledging her hard work, but Sophia knew that the true reward wasn't in the accolades, it was in the lives she had touched. The evening culminated with a gesture that symbolized her growth. Elon handed her the pendant that he had once given her, the symbol of her rise within the company. But Sophia, in a moment of clarity, knew that this part of her life was over. She handed it back to him, a silent acknowledgement that she had moved beyond the woman she had been. "I've learned a lot, Elon," Sophia said softly, "but my real success isn't here. It's out there." She gestured to the crowd of women who had joined her program. The women who had become her true legacy. Elon smiled, his face filled with admiration. "I know, Sophia, you've done something amazing, and I'm proud of you." Sophia stood by Daniel, looking out at the future that lay ahead. They had come so far together, and as they faced the next chapter, she knew that nothing could hold her back. The road ahead was theirs to shape, and together, they would continue to make a difference. With the lessons learned and the struggles behind her, Sophia had reached a place of peace and fulfillment. She had found her purpose, not through fame or fortune, but through the quiet, powerful act of lifting others up, and in that, she had found her true success. The Cleveland winter was unforgiving, each gust of wind a sharpened blade against exposed skin. Leonard, a man worn down by the relentless grind of life at 42, huddled against the brick wall of a deserted convenience store. His patched coat offered little warmth, his face a roadmap of hardship etched by time and loss. The neon glow of a distant billboard mocked his poverty, showcasing a world he could no longer reach. He held a cardboard sign, its plea, "Anything helps. God bless," barely legible under the grime. Each passing footstep was a reminder of his invisibility, a silent judgment of his fall from grace. Cars roared past, oblivious to the human wreckage clinging to the edge of their world. Then, a glint of expensive white stopped a few feet away. Impeccable sneakers that spoke of privilege and youth. Leonard, his heart weary but hope refusing to be extinguished, looked up. Standing there, phone in hand, was Baron Trump, the name instantly recognizable even in Leonard's dazed state. A gaggle of onlookers started forming, their phones pointed like weapons, ready to capture the spectacle. Here was a study in contrasts, the epitome of wealth and the embodiment of destitution. "Excuse me, young man," Leonard croaked, his voice raspy from disuse. "Could you spare $1? Anything would help." Baron Trump paused, his eyes scanning Leonard. A long, tense silence stretched, amplified by the city's din. It was a silence that Leonard knew well, the prelude to rejection, to averted gazes and quickened steps. But something in Baron's expression held a different quality, curiosity. Then, Baron asked, his voice calm yet probing, "What do you need it for?" The question took Leonard aback. No one ever asked why. They simply refused or occasionally tossed a coin without making eye contact. Baron's gaze was steady, unflinching, demanding honesty. "Well," Leonard stammered, rubbing his chapped hands together. "A cup of coffee would be nice. Maybe a sandwich. It's been days since I had a proper meal." Shame burned in his chest, but the biting wind offered no alternative. Baron lowered his phone, his attention now fully focused on Leonard. The surrounding crowd grew larger, their collective gaze a tangible weight. "Tell me what happened," Baron said, his voice carrying a surprising depth. Hesitantly, Leonard recounted his misfortunes, the plant closure, the illness, the crushing debt, the spiral into homelessness. The words tumbled out, raw and unfiltered, years of suppressed pain finally finding a voice. Baron listened intently, his young face etched with concern. The surrounding city faded away as Leonard poured out his story. "I'll give you more than $1. Barron said finally. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a crisp $100 bill and held it out to Leonard. "But I need you to promise me something." Leonard stared at the money, his mind struggling to comprehend the gesture. "What is it?" "Tomorrow morning," Barron said, scribbling an address on a notepad. "Go to this place. It's a resource center. Tell them Barron sent you. They can help you rebuild your life. But you have to want to help yourself." Leonard's eyes widened, the weight of hope settling heavily on his shoulders. He nodded, a silent promise made in the biting Cleveland winter. The money felt like a lifeline and a responsibility. The next morning, Leonard stood hesitant before the unassuming brick building. "Hope Outreach Resource Center," read the sign. A simple declaration that felt like a monumental promise. His hand trembled as he touched the address Barron had written. The $100 bill a comforting weight in his pocket. Doubts gnawed at him. Was this real? Could he truly change his life? Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the door. The warmth inside was a welcome embrace, a stark contrast to the bitter cold. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a warm smile sat behind the front desk. "How can I help you?" she asked gently. Leonard pulled out Barron's note, his voice barely a whisper. Barron Trump sent me. He said I should come here." Recognition dawned on her face. "Oh, you must be Leonard. We were expecting you. Come on, let's get you started." The next few hours were a blur. Leonard met with a caseworker who listened without judgment, charting a path towards stability. A bed at the shelter, a doctor's appointment, job training, a lifeline he hadn't dared to imagine. It was overwhelming, but for the first time in years, Leonard felt a flicker of hope. As night fell, tucked away in the quiet corner of the homeless shelter, Leonard understood the true meaning of Barron's kindness. Unbeknownst to Leonard, the world outside the shelter was buzzing. The video of Barron's encounter with Leonard had exploded online, racking up millions of views in mere hours. News outlets picked up the story, praising or criticizing Barron's act. Some saw it as a publicity stunt, a calculated move by a privileged young man. Others viewed it as a genuine display of compassion, a reminder that even in a fractured world, empathy could still prevail. The comments section became a battleground of opinions. "Privilege with a purpose," one user wrote. "This is how you use your influence for good." Another countered, "It's sad that kindness like this is so rare it surprises us. Probably just a PR stunt." The debate raged on, but one thing was undeniable. The video had touched a nerve. It sparked a conversation about poverty, compassion, and the responsibility of wealth. Back at his opulent home, Barron found himself bombarded by media requests and intrusive questions. The weight of public opinion pressed down on him, a suffocating blanket of expectations and judgments. His friends either envied him or distanced themselves, uncertain how to navigate the situation. Family members offered unsolicited advice, some praising him, others warning him about the dangers of attracting too much attention. "This is getting out of hand, Barron," his father said, his voice laced with concern. "You need to be careful. People will try to use you." But Barron remained steadfast. It wasn't about publicity or politics, it was about Leonard, about the promise he had made. He ignored the swirling chaos, focusing on the one thing he could control, making sure Leonard got the help he needed. He secretly arranged for larger donations to be funneled through the resource center, ensuring they had the means to support Leonard and others like him. Weeks turned into months, and Leonard began to transform. He diligently attended his therapy sessions, confronted his demons, and started to heal from the wounds of the past. He secured a part-time job at a local diner, his confidence slowly returning with each shift. One evening, as he was cleaning tables, a familiar face walked through the door. His heart skipped a beat. It was Paul, his younger brother, the one he hadn't spoken to in over a decade. "Leonard, is that really you?" Paul stammered, his eyes filled with a mixture of shock and remorse. "Paul," Leonard replied, his voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" "I saw the video," Paul said, his voice cracking. I didn't know things had gotten this bad. I should have been there for you." The reunion between Leonard and Paul was bittersweet. They shared awkward hugs and hesitant words, the weight of years of silence pressing down on them. As they talked, old wounds began to reopen. Resentment simmered beneath the surface, fueled by long-held grudges and unspoken accusations. They argued about their childhood, their parents, the choices they had made, a dark secret from their past, a tragic accident that had torn their family apart, resurfaced, threatening to shatter their fragile reconciliation. "It was your fault, Leonard," Paul accused, his voice filled with bitterness. "If you hadn't been so reckless. Don't you dare blame me," Leonard retorted, his eyes flashing with anger. "We both made mistakes. We both paid the price." As Leonard gained his footing, the job, the shelter, and the meetings became a path to climb. But old habits die hard. The weight of past mistakes and temptations to simply slip back into a world he knew seemed simpler dragged at his feet. One bad day at the diner, a rude customer, a missed shift, led to a familiar craving. He walked past the liquor store, the neon lights a siren's call. He could just have one drink, he reasoned, just to take the edge off. He walked inside, the familiar smell of alcohol filling his senses. But as he reached for a bottle, he saw Baron's face in his mind, the genuine concern and hope in his eyes. He remembered the promise he had made. With a shudder, he turned away and walked out of the store. The urge was still there, but the memory of Baron's kindness was stronger. Behind the scenes, a powerful and influential politician, Senator Caldwell, saw an opportunity in the viral video. He decided to exploit Leonard and Baron's story for his own political gain, weaving a narrative of compassion and social responsibility to bolster his image. But his motives were far from pure. He had a hidden agenda, a web of corruption and self-interest that threatened to unravel everything Leonard and Baron had worked for. Caldwell's team began subtly manipulating the narrative, pushing the media to focus on his role in supporting the resource center and downplaying Baron's involvement. He approached Leonard, offering him a chance to be the face of his campaign, promising fame and fortune. Leonard, initially flattered, began to sense something was amiss. Caldwell's promises seemed too good to be true, his motives too self-serving. Baron, meanwhile, was grappling with his own internal struggles. The weight of his family name and the expectations that came with it pressed down on him. He harbored a secret, a past mistake he had made that threatened to resurface and destroy his reputation. He confided in Leonard, sharing his fears and anxieties. "It's not easy being a Trump," Baron confessed, his voice filled with weariness. "People expect so much from me. But I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes, too." Leonard listened with empathy, recognizing the shared burden of guilt and the desire for redemption. He realized that Baron, despite his privilege, was just as vulnerable and human as he was. Together, Leonard and Baron began to investigate Senator Caldwell's motives. They uncovered a trail of corruption, bribery, and exploitation that led directly to Caldwell's office. They discovered that Caldwell was using the resource center as a front for illegal activities, skimming funds and exploiting vulnerable people. The truth was dangerous, and Caldwell's people began to target them, threatening their safety and trying to silence them. They knew they had to expose Caldwell before he destroyed everything they had worked for. Leonard and Baron, armed with evidence, decided to go public. They contacted a journalist known for her integrity and courage, ready to risk everything to expose Caldwell's corruption. The confrontation was explosive. Caldwell denied all allegations, accusing Leonard and Baron of being pawns in a political smear campaign. The media frenzy was intense, the public divided, and the stakes higher than ever. During the press conference, Caldwell's thugs showed up, seeking to intimidate Leonard into recanting. Baron stepped forward, shielding Leonard from any harm. In the chaos, Caldwell's thugs injured someone close to Leonard. The fight for justice would be a fierce one, but it was a fight that both Leonard and Baron were ready to face. With the help of the intrepid journalist, Leonard and Baron exposed Senator Caldwell's criminal activities to the world. The evidence was irrefutable, and the public outcry was deafening. Caldwell's career crumbled, his reputation tarnished beyond repair. He was indicted on multiple charges and faced the prospect of spending years in prison. But the victory came at a cost. Leonard, once again thrust into the spotlight, struggled to cope with the attention. He felt exposed and vulnerable, haunted by the ghosts of his past. He turned to Baron for support, finding solace in their unlikely friendship. Baron, now a young man on the cusp of adulthood, decided to dedicate his life to helping others. He established a foundation to support resource centers and other organizations that work to alleviate poverty and homelessness. He traveled the world, speaking out against injustice and advocating for social change. He learned that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars and cents, but in the impact one had on the lives of others. Years later, Leonard and Barron stood side by side at the opening of a new resource center, a testament to their enduring friendship and unwavering commitment to social justice. They had come a long way from that cold Cleveland night, both transformed by the power of compassion and the strength of the human spirit. The story ends on a hopeful note, emphasizing the power of human connection, the potential for redemption, and the enduring legacy of kindness in a world that desperately needs it. The key is to truly embrace these concepts with raw emotional honesty, to make it less about being nice and more about being human.
The ambulance siren sliced through the Los Angeles night, a sound lost on Kevin as he huddled in a shadowed alleyway, his stomach gnawing at him. He barely registered the noise. His world had shrunk to the gnawing hunger and the gnawing fear. The city glittered with wealth, a cruel contrast to his own stark reality. He clutched the tattered photograph of his daughter, Lily, her smiling face a painful reminder of the life he'd lost and a fragile talisman against the despair threatening to engulf him. He had nothing left but this photo and a cardboard sign that now lay ripped and discarded a few feet away. Earlier that evening, as he attempted to scrawl a plea for help, a group of teenagers, fueled by alcohol and boredom, had snatched the sign, laughing as they tore it to shreds. The act was small, but it felt like a final blow, robbing him of the last vestige of his dignity. He'd tried to fight back, but weakness and hunger had rendered him helpless. Now, the remnants of the sign were a harsh symbol of his powerlessness. He curled tighter, his bones aching against the cold concrete. Was this how it ended? Alone, forgotten, slowly fading into the city's anonymity? He pulled Lily's photo closer, a silent prayer forming in his throat. Please, someone, help me, for her sake. Clint Eastwood sat alone at an outdoor cafe on Melrose Avenue, the low hum of conversation and the clinking of silverware barely registering in his mind. His denim jacket and sunglasses shielded him from the casual stares, but even disguised, his presence commanded attention. He sipped his coffee, his eyes scanning the street, a flicker of something unreadable within their depths. It was a familiar haunt, a place where he could momentarily escape the gilded cage of Hollywood. He appreciated the anonymity, the chance to observe without being observed. Kevin, driven by the pangs of starvation and the ghost of his daughter's hopeful face, reluctantly approached the cafe. He felt a surge of shame, but the desperation was stronger. He recognized Eastwood, the legendary actor whose films had once filled his own comfortable living room. Now, he was approaching him as a beggar. He hesitated, then steeled himself, his hand trembling as he reached out, almost apologetically, towards Eastwood's sleeve. Excuse me, sir, I'm so sorry to bother you. I just need $1, to get something to eat. Anything. The moment Kevin's fingertips brushed Eastwood's denim jacket, a jolt of electricity seemed to surge through him. He wasn't just asking for money, he was reaching out for a lifeline. A photographer, hidden across the street, snapped a picture, capturing the encounter with a detached and opportunistic lens. Eastwood looked up slowly, his gaze piercing, assessing. The world seemed to fall away, leaving only the two of them suspended in a shared space. $1 won't get you far, Eastwood said, his voice low and gravelly. Sit down. Tell me what happened. Tell me your story. As Kevin settled into the chair, his body ached with weariness. The cafe buzz faded into background noise as he began to unpack the story of his fall. He spoke of his thriving construction business, the beautiful home he'd built, the loving wife and daughter who had filled his life with joy. His voice cracked as he recounted the events that had shattered his world, a bad investment, a supposed friend who had absconded with his life savings, leaving him drowning in debt. He spoke of the shame of losing everything, the agony of watching his family crumble under the weight of his mistakes. With each word, each painful detail, the cafe around them seemed to fade further into the distance. The clatter of dishes, the chatter of patrons, were all silenced as he poured out his heart to the man across from him. His voice caught as he described the loss of his family, the pain in Lily's eyes when he told her they had to sell their house, It wasn't just the money. It was the betrayal, Kevin said, his voice barely a whisper. I trusted him, and he took everything. Clint Eastwood listened intently, his expression unreadable, but Kevin sensed a flicker of understanding in his eyes. Still, he struggled to believe that a man of such privilege could truly comprehend the depths of his despair. Doubt gnawed at him, whispering that this was just a fleeting moment of sympathy. A hollow gesture from someone who could never truly understand. A bitter laugh escaped him. You don't get it, Kevin spat, more to himself than to Clint. You've never had to crawl through the dirt. Clint's gaze intensified. Haven't I? You'd be surprised what kind of dirt I've been through. The weight of Kevin's story hung in the air, heavy and palpable. Clint leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. He studied Kevin, his gaze unnervingly intense. So, what's next? He asked, the question hanging in the air like a challenge. Kevin scoffed, frustration bubbling to the surface. Next? There is no next. I'm just trying to survive. Trying to make it through the day. The helplessness was beginning to resurface. The desire to just give up and succumb to the overwhelming misery. Just then, a drunk staggered towards their table, his eyes glazed and unfocused. He slurred insults at Kevin, calling him a bum, a parasite. Eastwood rose to his feet, his posture radiating a quiet but potent authority. You need to move along, he said, his voice low but firm, warning to any trouble. The drunk, sensing the unspoken threat, mumbled an apology and stumbled away. The small act of protection, the simple demonstration of respect, jolted Kevin. He looked at Clint with a new sense of possibility in his eyes. He was still unsure how to proceed, but he knew this man was something different than what he had originally thought. Eastwood sat back down, his gaze softening slightly. That kind of scum is always out there. You cannot let them dictate your life, or you are already beaten. Done for. You're not beaten, are you? He said in a commanding tone. This is the life you're choosing. The existence you want? Kevin looked down, ashamed, knowing he'd been asking those questions of himself. For the longest time, Eastwood's gaze softened as he took in Kevin's gaunt frame and weary expression. Look, he said, his voice gentler now. I haven't always had it easy. Grew up poor during the Depression. My dad worked his hands to the bone just to put food on the table. We knew what it was like to struggle, to feel like the world was against you. He leaned back, his eyes drifting towards the bustling street, his mind miles away in his past. I remember one winter when we barely had enough coal to heat the house. My mom would wrap us in blankets and tell stories to keep our spirits up. She taught me that even in the darkest times, there's always hope, always a reason to keep fighting. A slight smile tugged at the corners of his lips. When I first came to Hollywood, I slept on friends' couches, worked odd jobs to pay the rent. Rejection after rejection. More than once, I thought about packing it all in and going home. He chuckled softly, but something inside me wouldn't let me quit. I knew I had something to offer, and I wasn't going to give up until I had my chance. He paused, his gaze returning to Kevin. The point is, everyone faces hardship. The key is to never give up on yourself. Eastwood reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card. It wasn't a fancy card. Just plain white with a name and address printed on it. This is a friend of mine. He runs a shelter not too far from here. They offer meals, a place to sleep, and job training. It's not a magic bullet, but it's a start, the first push you need. Or anything. He placed the card on the table, but before Kevin could reach for it, a gust of wind swept through the cafe, snatching the card and sending it spiraling into a nearby drain. The moment felt laden with symbolism, a sign that Kevin wasn't meant to escape his fate. Kevin slumped back in his chair, defeated. See, even the universe doesn't want me to get better, he muttered, feeling the hope that had flickered to life moments ago extinguished. Eastwood didn't react, didn't try to retrieve the card. He simply watched Kevin, his eyes filled with a mixture of understanding and disappointment. Don't you dare give up now, he said, his voice surprisingly stern. You think the card was the answer? No, the answer is within you. You have the power to change your life, but you have to choose to use it. Now, that paper is gone. Do you have a pen? Because this time, it's all on you. He handed Kevin a pen and told him the center's information, testing to see what Kevin could do. Kevin spent the next few days in a state of agonizing indecision. He clutched the scrap of paper with the center's information, his mind racing. He knew he couldn't continue living on the streets. But the thought of entering a shelter filled him with dread. He remembered the promises that had been broken before, the hopes that had been dashed. One night, shivering in the cold, he had a vivid dream about Lily. She was standing in a park, surrounded by other children, but she looked sad and lonely. He tried to reach her, but he couldn't move. He woke up in a cold sweat. The image of his daughter's forlorn face seared into his memory. He was done giving up and trying to lie his way through things. He was done being broken. Because if he was, Lily would be too. He had to find a way out of this darkness. Not just for himself, but for her. The next morning, he boarded a bus heading towards the shelter. His heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. He was stepping into the unknown. But he was finally taking control of his destiny. Stepping into the shelter felt like entering another world. The air was thick with the smell of disinfectant and the murmur of voices. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glare on the faces of the other residents. Kevin felt exposed, out of place, as if everyone was judging him. He was directed to a small waiting room, where he sat huddled in a corner, trying to make himself invisible. A disheveled man with wild eyes approached him, muttering about government conspiracies and alien abductions. Kevin shrunk back, overwhelmed by the chaos and despair around him. Just as he was about to bolt, a kind-faced woman approached him, her eyes filled with warmth and compassion. "Welcome," she said, her voice gentle. "We're here to help. What can we do for you?" Kevin hesitated, then slowly, haltingly, began to tell her his story. The weight of his burdens finally beginning to lift. The days that followed were a blur of appointments, paperwork, and therapy sessions. Kevin was assigned a caseworker who helped him navigate the complexities of the social welfare system. He received medical care for his ailments and began attending group therapy sessions. He started sleeping in a bed, eating regular meals, and felt like a human being for the first time in years. One day, he met a fellow resident named Sarah, a former soldier who had lost her home after suffering from PTSD. They bonded over their shared struggles and began to support each other. Sarah taught him coping mechanisms for his anxiety and encouraged him to pursue his passion for carpentry. Slowly, the spark of hope that had been dormant for so long began to flicker to life. With the help of the shelter, Kevin secured a job washing dishes at a local diner. The work was grueling and the pay was minimal. But it was a start. He took pride in his work, scrubbing the plates until they gleamed, finding satisfaction in the simple act of creating something clean and orderly. One evening, as he was leaving work, a group of teenagers surrounded him, taunting him about his past. "Hey, it's the bum," one of them shouted. Kevin clenched his fists, his anger rising to the surface. But then he remembered Lily, and the promise he had made to himself. He took a deep breath and walked away, refusing to let their negativity drag him down. As Kevin slowly rebuilt his life, he found himself thinking often about Clint Eastwood. He knew he owed him a debt of gratitude, but he wasn't sure how to repay it. He couldn't give him money, but he could do the next best thing. One evening, he sat down and wrote Eastwood a letter, pouring out his heart onto the page. He described his struggles, his progress, and the hope that he had rediscovered. He thanked Eastwood for seeing something in him, for giving him a second chance. He sealed the letter and mailed it, a small offering of gratitude to the man who had changed his life. Days later, he finally built up the courage to contact Lily. The conversation was awkward at first, filled with hesitations and unspoken words. But as they talked, Kevin felt a connection rekindle, a sense of hope that they could rebuild their relationship. He knew he had a long way to go, but he was finally on the right path. Weeks later, Eastwood received Kevin's letter. He read it carefully, a rare smile gracing his lips. The struggles he had faced were what made his successes possible, something he had tried to teach Kevin. As he sat in his quiet office, he replayed the events of that day at the cafe. The face of Kevin as a broken, empty man, in a cycle of endless pain, and how a chance encounter had provided a light, a possibility. Then, the phone rang and a producer was on the line, asking if the recent newspaper article about Eastwood giving money to some bum was going to negatively impact the new movie. Eastwood hung up and called Kevin, and a genuine warmth spread through him as he heard the other man's voice. In the background, Eastwood heard a small girl and Kevin, who whispered to Lily that it was Clint Eastwood. A bond had been forged. Inspired by his own journey, Kevin began volunteering at the shelter where he had found solace. He shared his story with other residents, offering them words of encouragement and support. He became a beacon of hope in a place that often felt devoid of it. Kevin went on to start his own construction company, hiring people who had gone through hard times. Months later, Kevin and Eastwood, now friends, stood together at a charity event. Speaking about the importance of giving back, Kevin looked out at the crowd, his heart filled with gratitude. He had come a long way from the streets, but he would never forget where he came from, and he would always be grateful for the kindness of a stranger. The legendary Clint Eastwood, who had given him a chance to rewrite his story. This time, not only was Kevin no longer living in darkness, but his light was shining and allowing so many others to see the same.
The crisp morning air of Washington barely registered on J.D. Vance. Newly minted Vice President of the United States, he found himself staring out the window, the Capitol dome gleaming distantly. A summons had arrived, an invitation, or perhaps a challenge, from Marcus Bennett, the titan of liberal talk shows. Bennett was known for his sharp wit, relentless questioning, and a knack for cornering even the most seasoned politicians. Vance knew this wasn't just another appearance, it was a battlefield. The invitation itself was cordial enough, promising a discussion on the future of America, unity, and bridging divides, but a nervous flutter in his stomach told him otherwise. Sarah, his trusted aide, confirmed his unease. "Sir," she began hesitantly, "we've received information from our contacts within the network. Bennett's team is prepping a series of highly sensitive questions, focusing on your past criticisms of President Trump, your stance on certain cultural issues, and even some allegations related to your business dealings before entering politics." A wave of frustration washed over Vance. He had anticipated scrutiny, but this felt like a calculated ambush. He closed his eyes, remembering the countless hours he had spent wrestling with his own convictions, the difficult decisions he had made to serve his country. Now, he was about to face a gauntlet of public judgment. Later that evening, he found himself pacing in his office, a familiar ache settling in his chest. He picked up the phone, calling his wife, Usha. Her calm voice was a balm to his frayed nerves. "Honey," he said, "I need your advice. Bennett's going to come after me hard. He's dug up everything, the old tweets, the controversial statements, even those land deals from years ago. I'm not sure how to navigate this." Usha listened patiently, her quiet strength a reassuring presence. "JD, you've faced tougher battles than this. Remember where you come from, the values you hold dear. Don't let him rattle you. Be honest, be authentic, and let your actions speak for themselves. The truth will always prevail." Her words were a lifeline, grounding him in the core principles that had guided him this far. The studio hummed with a frenetic energy. Makeup artists buzzed around, cables snaked across the floor, and the air crackled with anticipation. J.D. Vance stood backstage, trying to center himself amidst the chaos. He noticed subtle cues that amplified his unease: an unusually tight-lipped producer, a stage manager avoiding eye contact, and a script lying face down on Bennett's desk, its contents concealed. The scent of manufactured controversy hung heavy in the air. He thought back to his time in the Marines. The lessons learned in the heat of battle: control your emotions, assess the situation, and never underestimate your opponent. He had to stay focused, composed, and prepared for anything. Moments before airtime, Sarah approached him, her face etched with concern. "Sir, I just overheard Bennett talking to one of his writers. He's planning to bring up that old investigation into your company, the one the Democrats tried to use against you during the campaign. They're going to paint you as a hypocrite, someone who profited off the backs of working-class families while preaching about their struggles." Vance took a deep breath, his jaw tightening. He knew this was going to be a long, brutal night. He looked at Sarah, his eyes filled with determination. "Sarah, I'm not going to let them define me. I'm going to tell the truth, defend my record, and stand up for the principles I believe in. No matter what Bennett throws at me, I'm not backing down." He straightened his tie, squared his shoulders, and walked onto the stage, a warrior entering the arena. The bright lights blinded him momentarily, but he could feel the weight of millions of eyes upon him. Judging his every move, Marcus Bennett greeted him with a disarming smile. But Vance saw the glint of steel in his eyes. The battle had begun. "Welcome to Bennett Speaks," Marcus Bennett announced, his voice resonating with practiced authority. "Tonight, we have the honor of hosting Vice President J.D. Vance, a man who has taken a fascinating journey through the American political landscape." He turned to Vance, his smile unwavering. "Mr. Vice President, you were once a vocal critic of Donald Trump. Now, you're his second in command. What change?" The question hung in the air, a clear invitation to stumble. Bennett expected a defensive response, a clumsy attempt to justify a perceived betrayal. But Vance was ready. He met Bennett's gaze directly, his voice calm and measured. "Marcus, people evolve. We learn. We grow. We gain new perspectives. My understanding of Donald Trump changed as I witnessed his leadership firsthand. I saw his commitment to the American people, his willingness to challenge the status quo, and his unwavering belief in the potential of this country. I may have had disagreements in the past, but I've learned to appreciate his strengths and his vision." Bennett raised an eyebrow, a hint of surprise flickering across his face. "So, you abandoned your principles for political expediency?" "Not at all," Vance countered. "My principles remain the same: a commitment to economic opportunity, a strong national defense, and a belief in the power of individual responsibility. I simply realized that these goals could be achieved through a different path. Under a different leader." "Have you never changed your mind, Marcus? Have you never re-evaluated your beliefs in the face of new evidence?" The studio audience stirred, a murmur of discontent rippling through the crowd. Bennett shifted uncomfortably. He had expected Vance to crumble under pressure, to be forced into a corner. Instead, he was being challenged on his own turf. The air crackled with tension. Bennett, recovering quickly, shifted his attack. "Mr. Vice President, let's talk about your speech at the National Prayer Breakfast. Some critics have accused you of blurring the lines between religion and politics, using faith as a tool to advance your agenda. How do you respond to that?" Vance, far from backing down, leaned forward. "Marcus, faith is not a tool. It's a foundation. It's the bedrock of our society, the moral compass that guides our actions. The Founding Fathers understood this. They believed in the importance of religious liberty, but they also recognized the vital role that faith plays in shaping our national character. I'm not ashamed to talk about my faith. I'm not ashamed to draw inspiration from the teachings of the Bible. In fact, I believe it's essential for leaders to have a strong moral compass, a sense of something larger than themselves." He paused, his voice softening. "I grew up in Middletown, Ohio. My grandmother, Mama, was the moral center of our family. She taught me the importance of hard work, honesty, and faith. She showed me that even in the face of adversity, you can always find strength in God and in the love of your family. Those values have stayed with me throughout my life. They guide my decisions as vice president, and I will never apologize for that." A hush fell over the studio. Vance's sincerity was palpable, his words resonating with many in the audience. Bennett, momentarily disarmed, struggled to regain control of the narrative. He had underestimated Vance's ability to connect with people on a personal level, to transform a political debate into a conversation about core values. The tide was turning. Bennett, sensing the shift in momentum, reached for his most potent weapon. "Mr. Vice President, let's not forget your past criticisms of President Trump. You've called him everything from a cultural heroine to a political disaster. How can the American people trust someone who so vehemently opposed their current leader?" Vance, prepared for this line of attack, didn't flinch. "Marcus, I've never denied my past criticisms. I had concerns about President Trump's temperament, his policies, and his impact on our society. But I also learned a great deal from him. I saw his ability to connect with ordinary Americans, his willingness to challenge conventional wisdom, and his unwavering determination to put America first. He achieved significant accomplishments during his first term, from tax cuts to regulatory reform to strengthening our military. I've learned to appreciate his leadership, and I'm proud to serve alongside him." He paused, his eyes locking with Bennett's. "We live in a media environment that rewards sound bites and sensationalism. But at the end of the day, what really matters are results. President Trump has delivered results for the American people, and I'm committed to helping him continue to do so." Vance then skillfully pivoted, turning the tables on Bennett. Marcus, you've spent your career criticizing Republicans, demonizing conservatives, and promoting a liberal agenda. But what have you actually accomplished? What tangible benefits have your policies brought to the American people? It's easy to criticize from the sidelines, but it takes real courage and leadership to get things done. The audience erupted in applause. Vance's ability to turn a negative attack into a positive defense had caught Bennett off guard. The host struggled to find a coherent response, his carefully crafted narrative unraveling before his eyes. Growing increasingly desperate, Bennett sought to undermine Vance's authenticity. Mr. Vice President, you've come a long way from Middletown, Ohio. You've made millions in the venture capital world, hobnobbed with elites, and now you're living in the lap of luxury in Washington. Have you forgotten where you came from? Have you lost touch with the struggles of ordinary Americans? Vance's expression hardened. Marcus, I'll never forget where I came from. I'll never forget the poverty, the addiction, and the despair that plagued my community. That's why I'm in public service, to fight for those who have been left behind. To give a voice to the voiceless. To ensure that every American has the opportunity to achieve their dreams. Regardless of their background, he shared a poignant anecdote about his childhood, about the challenges he faced growing up in a broken home, about the unwavering support of his grandmother, Mama, who instilled in him the values of hard work, perseverance, and faith. Mama didn't have much, but she gave me everything I needed: love, guidance, and a belief in myself. I'm standing here today because of her. I owe it to her, and to all those who have struggled and sacrificed, to fight for a better future for our country. The studio was silent, captivated by Vance's heartfelt words. Even Bennett seemed moved, a flicker of empathy crossing his face. The veneer of political animosity had been stripped away, revealing the raw humanity beneath. Vance could feel the shift in momentum, the palpable change in Bennett's demeanor. It was time to press his advantage. Marcus, he began, his voice calm but firm. You've spent the last hour questioning my principles, my motives, and my integrity, but I want to ask you a question. Have you ever changed your mind about anything? Have you ever reevaluated your beliefs in the face of new evidence? Or are you so certain in your own righteousness that you're incapable of admitting a mistake? Bennett stammered, caught off guard by the unexpected interrogation. Well, I think I've evolved on certain issues over the years. Evolved, or adapted to the prevailing winds of political correctness? Vance countered, his voice laced with skepticism. It's easy to preach to the choir, to parrot the conventional wisdom, to cater to the demands of the liberal elite, but it takes real courage to stand up for what you believe in. Even when it's unpopular, even when it means facing criticism and ridicule. Have you ever done that, Marcus? Have you ever taken a stand that truly challenged the status quo? Bennett, flustered and defensive, attempted to deflect the question. But Vance pressed relentlessly. I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm simply asking you to be honest with yourself. To confront the contradictions in your own beliefs. To acknowledge the possibility that you might be wrong. Bennett, desperately seeking to regain his footing, revisited the issue of religion. Mr. Vice President, are you suggesting that your faith gives you some kind of moral superiority? Are you implying that those who don't share your beliefs are somehow less virtuous? Vance, seizing the opportunity, responded with passion and conviction. Absolutely not. I believe that all people are created equal, regardless of their faith or their background. I respect the right of every American to worship, or not worship, as they choose, but I also believe that faith is a powerful force for good in the world. It inspires us to be better people, to treat others with compassion and respect, to strive for justice and equality. He reiterated his earlier point about the Founding Fathers, emphasizing their belief in the importance of religious liberty. They understood that a nation without faith is a nation without a soul. They created a system that protects the right of every individual to practice their religion freely, without fear of government interference. He then recounted another poignant story from his childhood, about the kindness and generosity of a local church that had helped his family during a time of crisis. That church didn't ask about our politics or our beliefs. They simply saw a family in need, and they offered their help. That's the true spirit of Christianity, the true spirit of America. Vance, emboldened by the audience's positive response, shifted his focus to the broader issue of media bias. Marcus, you and I both know that the mainstream media has a certain narrative that they want to promote. They tend to favor liberal policies. They tend to demonize conservatives. And they tend to dismiss anyone who challenges their worldview. But that's not the reality of America. There are millions of people in this country who feel ignored, marginalized, and disenfranchised by the media elite. They believe in traditional values. They believe in hard work. And they believe in the American dream. But they're tired of being told that their beliefs are outdated, that their values are irrelevant, that their voices don't matter. He paused, his voice rising with passion. I'm here to tell them that they do matter. Their voices are important, and their beliefs are valid. I'm here to fight for them, to stand up for their values, and to ensure that their voices are heard in Washington. Bennett, visibly shaken, attempted to interrupt, but Vance continued, his momentum unstoppable. The media wants to divide us, to pit us against each other, to create a climate of fear and distrust. But we can't let them. We have to remember what unites us, our shared love of this country, our commitment to freedom and opportunity, and our belief in the power of the American spirit. As the clock ticked down, signaling the end of the interview, Vance delivered his closing statement. Marcus, I came here tonight to have a conversation about the future of America. About how we can bridge our divides, and how we can work together to create a better future for all Americans. I know that we have our differences, but I believe that we have more in common than we realize. We both want what's best for this country. We both want to see our children and grandchildren thrive. And we both want to leave a legacy of peace, prosperity, and freedom. He looked directly into the camera, addressing the millions of viewers watching at home. I challenge all of you to put aside your differences, to reach out to those who disagree with you, to listen to their perspectives, and to find common ground. We're all Americans, and we're all in this together. Let's work together to build a brighter future for our country. The studio audience erupted in thunderous applause. Bennett, defeated but gracious, shook Vance's hand. The interview was over. As Vance walked off the stage, he knew that he had faced a formidable challenge. But he had emerged victorious. He had defended his principles, stood up for his values, and inspired hope in the hearts of millions. The Bennett confrontation had become a defining moment in his career, a testament to his courage, his integrity, and his unwavering commitment to the American dream. The future, though uncertain, felt a little brighter. The humid Washington air hung heavy as Amelia, the newly appointed Attorney General, surveyed the city from her office window. Pam Bondi was a name whispered with respect and trepidation. A formidable legal mind, she now held the nation's scales of justice. Yet, beneath the veneer of power, a storm was brewing. Whispers of a covert organization, Hydra, reached her ears. A clandestine group aiming to destabilize the government and seize control through illicit means. A recent attempt to extort key information from a former colleague set her on high alert. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, in a dimly lit safehouse in Prague, a team of highly skilled operatives prepared for an audacious mission. Known only as the Serpent, their leader, a shadowy figure with a penchant for chaos, unveiled their objective: infiltrate Bondi's heavily fortified estate and retrieve classified files, evidence linked to Hydra's clandestine operations. The prize: information that could expose corruption at the highest levels of government. Their task would be facilitated by a mole within Bondi's inner circle. Someone trusted implicitly. This inside man gave them blueprints to the home security. The squad included Ghost, a master of disguise, Spectre, a cybersecurity prodigy, and Titan, the Brawn. The plan: exploit a scheduled system update on the perimeter network as a smokescreen for their entry. It was high risk, but they were betting on the complacency of those protecting a political titan. Their motivations were a tangled web of disillusionment and financial incentive. They believed the information they sought would expose governmental overreach, thus making their actions justified. Bondi, despite her public persona of unyielding strength, felt a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. An unexplained spike in network traffic at her private residence, flagged by her trusted security advisor, Sarah, made her instantly suspicious. Ignoring Sarah's pleas to relocate to a secure facility, Bondi resolved to personally oversee the investigation. Her intuition screamed that this was more than a simple security breach. As the Serpent's team navigated the web of sensors and cameras surrounding the estate, Spectre faced an unexpected challenge. The system's AI, programmed with adaptive learning capabilities, had detected the anomaly and initiated countermeasures. It was no ordinary firewall. Inside the residence, Bondi, armed with a pistol and years of experience in the courtroom, moved through the darkened corridors. Her training kicked in. Instinct and training had always gotten her far. The electrical power flickered, plunging the house into momentary darkness. This provided an opening. Ghost, disguised as a maintenance worker, breached the outer perimeter, feeding Spectre data on the AI responses and layouts of the compound. Titan, his hulking frame a shadow in the night, eliminated several security drones silently. They were closer than Bondi imagined. The storm outside mirrored the tension inside. This was no longer a simple intrusion, it was a high-stakes chess match. As the security system initiated a lockdown, sealing off exits and triggering alarms, Bondi activated a hidden protocol, a failsafe installed years ago during her tenure as Attorney General. This protocol rerouted the system's control to a secure terminal in her private study, giving her a bird's-eye view of the intruder's movements. Spectre, however, had anticipated this. The mole had provided schematics of the home's entire system and layout. He had devised a counter-program to hijack the failsafe. A fierce digital battle erupted within the mansion's network. Bondi, though adept with technology, found herself outmatched by Spectre's raw talent. As the firewall weakened, a creeping dread took root. She realized the resources backing this intrusion were far greater than initially presumed. She had been lulled into a false sense of security. Meanwhile, Ghost and Titan reached the study, breaching the reinforced door with explosive force. The element of surprise was lost. Bondi was waiting for them. She released a blinding flash grenade, momentarily disorienting the intruders. The ensuing chaos allowed her to slip through a secret passage behind a bookshelf, disappearing into the depths of the estate. Cornered and wounded, Bondi found herself in an underground bunker beneath the estate, the last line of defense. Her phone had no service, the house was sealed. The heavy steel door leading into the bunker had locked behind her. Outside, Titan was beginning to get the door open. Ghost had noticed something was off in the mole's diagram, however, and he was able to tell Titan to stop. It was rigged with explosives. He said they would have to find another way in. Through her security feed in the bunker, she saw the men had been joined by the Serpent himself. A distorted video message crackled to life on one of her monitors. Amelia, the Serpent's voice echoed, devoid of emotion. Release the files. Save yourself and what's left of your career. Bondi sneered, her resolve hardening. I'll see you in hell before I give you anything. The Serpent chuckled. Such conviction. But what about the collateral damage? What about your family? A live feed appeared on another monitor, showing Sarah, her advisor, bound and gagged in a distant location. Bondi's expression faltered. This was not just a political assault, it was personal. She had a decision to make. Uphold her oath or protect those she loved. The choice felt impossible. A devil's bargain offered with icy precision. The ticking clock added to the suffocating weight of her dilemma. Time was running out. Bondi, her mind racing, engaged the bunker's intercom system. I need proof that Sarah is unharmed, she demanded, her voice unwavering despite the tremor in her hands. The Serpent obliged, displaying a brief video of Sarah, visibly shaken but alive. Cooperate, and she walks free. Bondi hesitated. She needed time. An edge. The files are heavily encrypted. She lied. It'll take me hours to unlock them. The Serpent, aware of Bondi's technical prowess, countered. I'll send Spectre down. He'll decrypt them in minutes. All I want is the drive. He gestured to the door. Bondi realized the Serpent's true objective wasn't just the files, but also her. They needed her out of the picture. She bought time and had to think fast. Instead of granting access, she disabled the lighting within the bunker, plunging the room into complete darkness. She knew the layout intimately, having designed it herself. Using her night vision goggles, she moved silently, disabling the security system and rerouting power to a hidden transmitter. A distress signal, her last hope, was sent to a secure government agency. The bunker door exploded inwards. The house had been breached. Spectre was through, but she was ready for him. A hand-to-hand combat ensued, with Bondi using her knowledge of the bunker and Spectre's unfamiliarity against him. As she gained the upper hand, a siren wailed in the distance. Growing louder, the agency had received her signal. Realizing their plan had failed, the Serpent ordered Titan to extract Spectre and abandon the mission. Moments later, the bunker door blew open. The authorities moved in, securing the facility. The Serpent, Ghost, and Titan had vanished, leaving behind a trail of evidence. Bondi, bruised and battered but unbroken, watched as Sarah was brought to safety. The files, secure in their vault, were retrieved. In the aftermath, the truth began to surface. The mole within Bondi's inner circle was revealed to be a disillusioned former colleague. Manipulated by Hydra's promises of exposing corruption, the information she protected exposed the corruption behind Hydra. Amelia, a champion of the law and a bastion of justice, had safeguarded the interests of the entire country. The cost had been steep, a harrowing glimpse into the darkness that lurked beneath the veneer of power. She stood by the window. The city was a constellation of light again. Her fight had just begun. The immediate crisis averted, Bondi focused on damage control. News of the intrusion had leaked, sparking a media frenzy. The details were shrouded in secrecy, officially labeled a security incident, but rumors of espionage and government conspiracy ran rampant. Bondi walked a tightrope, needing to reassure the public while preventing the sensitive information from falling into the wrong hands. She entrusted the investigation to Agent Thorne, a no-nonsense FBI operative known for his relentless pursuit of the truth. Thorne's team meticulously combed through the estate, analyzing surveillance footage, interviewing witnesses, and tracing digital fingerprints. His initial findings pointed towards Hydra's involvement, but the true scope of their operation remained elusive. Meanwhile, Bondi grappled with the betrayal of her former colleague, David. Despite the threat Hydra posed, she couldn't shake the feeling that David was merely a pawn in a larger game. She visited him in custody, seeking answers. He babbled about governmental overreach, about the need to expose the truth. However painful, he genuinely thought he was a hero. He wasn't acting alone, and there was a chain of command that could be revealed. Agent Thorne, following a lead gleaned from the recovered data, traced the stolen intel to a shell corporation in Switzerland. He dispatched a team to investigate, but they encountered a web of false identities and dead ends. Hydra was adept at covering their tracks, a testament to their financial resources and influence. Bondi, restless and dissatisfied with the slow progress, took matters into her own hands. Utilizing her extensive network of contacts within the intelligence community, she uncovered a pattern of suspicious financial transactions linked to several high-ranking officials, including a powerful senator known for his staunch opposition to her policies. The senator's name was Gregory Hartford. The discovery sent a chill down her spine. If a sitting senator was involved, Hydra's reach extended far deeper than she had imagined. Bringing down an organization this influential would require irrefutable proof and the support of the highest authority. Bondi set a secret meeting with the president. Meanwhile, the remnants of the Serpent's team regrouped in a remote location. Disappointed in their failure, they argued who was to blame for the plan going awry. The leader of the outfit, an enigmatic figure who always remained in the shadows, communicated through encrypted channels, his displeasure palpable. He issued a new directive: eliminate Bondi and anyone who posed a threat to their operation. Before they uncovered the full extent of their conspiracy, armed with the information gathered by Bondi, Agent Thorne finally caught a break. He discovered a hidden server containing encrypted communications between the Shell Corporation and Hydra's leadership. Cracking the encryption revealed a chilling plot, a coordinated attack on several key government installations, designed to create chaos and destabilize the nation. The attack was imminent, scheduled to coincide with a major political summit. If successful, it would cripple the government and pave the way for Hydra to seize control. Thorne raced against time to alert the authorities, but his communication lines were suddenly cut off. Hydra had anticipated his move and launched a cyber attack, isolating him and his team. They had managed to compromise his own communications. Bondi realized she was running out of time. Senator Hartford was to be her ally, And even he could have been a part of the Hydra, and that's why things always seemed one step ahead. With communication lines compromised and Agent Thorne out of contact, Bondi took a gamble, confiding in the president, presenting him with evidence of Senator Hartford's involvement in Hydra's imminent attack. The president, initially skeptical, was swayed by Bondi's unwavering conviction and the gravity of the evidence. He authorized a full-scale operation to neutralize Hydra and protect the nation. Bondi and the president turned to the only person they felt they could trust outside of the government: Sarah, her security advisor. They shared the information with her and put her in charge of alerting the authorities outside of their immediate circle. Bondi now, with the assistance of the president, arranged a public press conference, intending to expose Hydra's conspiracy. She had to buy Agent Thorne time to coordinate the counteroffensive. The conference was scheduled for noon. But even with those safety measures, danger still lurked. The Serpent already had plans to take out Bond and stop the press conference from ever happening. As Bondi stood poised before the assembled media, preparing to unveil Hydra's treachery, a sense of foreboding washed over her. She knew she was walking into a trap, but the truth had to be revealed, no matter the cost. The press conference began. Bondi spoke with unwavering conviction, outlining the evidence of Hydra's influence and their planned attack. The reporters listened in stunned silence, struggling to comprehend the magnitude of the conspiracy. Suddenly, chaos erupted. A series of explosions rocked the building, plunging the press conference into darkness. Hydra's operatives, disguised as journalists and security personnel, launched a coordinated assault, aiming to silence Bondi permanently and eliminate any witnesses. Amidst the pandemonium, Bondi, drawing on her legal knowledge and unwavering will to protect, took cover, determined to survive. Her security detail, outnumbered but fiercely loyal, fought valiantly to hold off the attackers. As the chaos intensified, Agent Thorne, having evaded Hydra's cyber attack, arrived at the scene with a squad of FBI agents. A fierce gun battle ensued, the echoes of gunfire reverberating through the shattered building. Thorne, guided by his instincts, fought his way toward Bondi, determined to protect her and bring Hydra to justice. He discovered Senator Hartford, orchestrating the attack from a hidden command center. A confrontation erupted. After a brief and brutal skirmish, Thorne apprehended Hartford, exposing him as a key figure in Hydra's conspiracy. Meanwhile, Bondi found herself face to face with the Serpent. His mask finally removed. The Serpent was David, her former trusted colleague. They fought a brutal hand-to-hand combat, the weight of betrayal adding intensity to their struggle. It was David who believed that the truth needed to be revealed, even though the means were less than ideal. As the end neared, David's hand closed around a detonator, threatening to destroy the building and everyone inside. Summoning her strength, Bondi disarmed David, preventing the explosion. Agent Thorne and his team converged, securing David and the remaining Hydra operatives. With the conspiracy exposed and the attack thwarted, the nation breathed a collective sigh of relief. The imminent threat had been averted, and the truth, however painful, had prevailed. In the aftermath, Senator Hartford and the Hydra operatives were brought to justice, their insidious plot exposed to the world. The government underwent a period of reform, implementing stricter regulations and oversight to prevent future conspiracies. Bondi, hailed as a national hero, retired from her position as Attorney General, opting to dedicate her life to fighting corruption and advocating for justice. She had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, forever scarred by the experience, but emboldened by the knowledge that truth, however challenging, would always prevail. Years later, Bondi received an encrypted message. The Serpent, still at large, had a final message: "You may have won the battle, Amelia, but the war has just begun." Bondi looked towards the horizon. A storm brewing. The whispers of Hydra grew quiet again, but the threat was never truly gone. Amelia knew her fight would never truly be over. The shadow of power lingered, a constant reminder of the price of justice. Her struggle to champion the law and defend freedom's cause had begun once more. Her past had prepared her for her future.